Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a typical 21-year-old college student juggling classes, a part-time job, and family issues. Yeah, family drama. My life feels like a soap opera, but without the glitz. One day, as I was leaving work, my boss asked if I could work an extra shift this weekend. I sighed, thinking about my midterms, but agreed. Lately, I've been trying to manage between my studies and my job at the local diner. I'm stretched thin, just like my wallet after paying bills. Speaking of bills, my family situation is complicated. My parents divorced when I was a kid, and my dad, Tom, quickly remarried. Enter Karen, my stepmom, and Emily, my stepsister, who's as friendly as a toothache. One evening, I reminded Dad about the electric bill due the next day. He forgot and asked me to cover it. Business has been slow for his construction company, so I've been helping out financially even though I'm struggling myself. I said I'd handle it and started calculating how many extra hours I'd need to work. Meanwhile, Emily lives her life without lifting a finger or contributing anything. One day, when I visited Dad's place, she demanded her allowance. Allowance? You're 18, get a job, I told her. She just rolled her eyes and whined that Dad said I'd take care of it. Of course, he did. Emily's Dad's favorite, and I'm the family's ATM. Despite all this, I've been working hard to keep my grades up. I didn't want my GPA to drop just because I'm financially supporting my family. I asked my professor for an extension on a paper, feeling guilty. Sarah, this is the third time this semester. Is everything okay? He asked. I forced a smile and said I'd have it by Friday. Just when I thought I had everything under control, Dad called with serious news. We need to talk about your future, he said, making my stomach drop. I agreed to come over the next evening, feeling anxious. I thought maybe he'd be proud of my good exam results. When I arrived at Dad's house, my stomach was in knots. I couldn't wait to share my news, but Dad's serious tone made me freeze. Karen and Emily were there too, both looking very serious. Sarah, you know Emily is starting college soon, Dad said. Yeah, I replied, confused. Well, we've been thinking it might be best if you took a break from your studies, just for a while, Dad continued. I blinked, thinking I must have heard wrong. A break? Why? To work full-time, Dad said. Emily needs help with her tuition. Wait, you want me to drop out to pay for Emily's college? I asked, shocked. It's not dropping out, just postponing, Karen said. Are you kidding me? I'm already working hard to help with bills, I protested. Dad shifted uncomfortably. I know, and we appreciate it, but Emily needs this opportunity. You're older, you can always go back later. Later? I'm in the middle of my degree, I can't just pause my life. Don't be so dramatic, Emily said, rolling her eyes. It's not like your art history degree is curing cancer or anything. It's economics, I snapped, and that's not the point. Sarah, watch your tone, Karen said sharply. We're asking you to be a team player here. A team player? I've been carrying this whole team for years. I'm drowning in student loans and working crazy hours. And now you want me to give up my education for Emily? It's your duty as the older sibling, Dad said firmly. Emily deserves a chance too. And what about my chance? I asked. The one I'm working so hard for? Oh please, Emily scoffed, like you're not privileged enough already. Privileged? I shouted. I'm working 2 jobs and barely sleeping. At least you got to go to college. It's my turn now, Emily pouted. Your turn? This isn't a carnival ride, it's my future we're talking about. Sarah, don't be selfish, Karen scolded. Family helps family. Selfish? I've been paying half your mortgage and even bought Emily's prom dress when you were short on cash, I said, feeling frustrated. Dad looked uncomfortable. We know you've helped out, but what? I interrupted. I'm keeping this family afloat, and now you want me to sink my own ship? It's not forever, Sarah, Dad said, just until Emily gets settled. And how long will that be? A year? 4? What about my loans and career plans? We'll figure it out, Dad said. Dismissively, the important thing is supporting Emily right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tears of frustration welled up in my eyes. I can't do this. I won't. Sarah, be reasonable, Dad pleaded. Reasonable? You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for so Emily can party through freshman year on my dime. Hey, Emily protested. I'm going to study. This is insane. I'm out of here. I stormed out, ignoring their calls. Once in my car, I broke down and fumbled for my phone. Alex, are you free? I need to talk. 20 minutes later, I was at Alex's place, spilling everything between sobs. They want me to do what? Are they out of their minds? Apparently, I can't believe Dad would ask this of me. Sarah, honey, you've got to stop enabling them. They're taking advantage of you. But they're family. Family doesn't treat you like an ATM. You need to cut them off. Cut them off? I can't just. Why not? They're ready to flush your future down the toilet. It's time to put yourself first. I wiped my eyes, Alex's words sinking in. Maybe it was time to teach them a lesson. You're right. I can't keep doing this, but how do I make them understand? Sometimes people only learn when they face consequences. Maybe it's time they felt what it's like without your support. As the idea took root, I felt a mix of fear and determination. It was time for a change. If my family couldn't see my worth, I'd have to show them the hard way. Alex, I've got an idea, but I need your help. I'm all yours, girl. What's the plan? We're going to create a fake job offer. Something big, something that'll make them realize what they're losing. Ooh, I like where this is going. What kind of job? How about a marketing position for a startup in California? It's far enough that I'd have to move. Perfect. I've got a friend in graphic design. We can whip up a legit-looking offer letter. A week later, I was ready to drop the bomb. I called Dad, my heart racing. Hey Dad, got a minute? I've got some news. Sarah, what's up, honey? I'm quitting my job. I got an offer for a great job in California, so I told Dad, I'm taking it. California? But what about our bills? Dad asked. I can't keep supporting everyone, Dad. I need to focus on my future now. But Sarah, we need you. What about Emily's tuition? I'm sure you'll figure it out. You wanted me to focus on my future, right? Well, this is me doing that. I hung up, feeling both guilty and relieved. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of urgent calls and texts. Sarah, please, we can't make rent this month, Dad pleaded. I'm sorry, Dad, but I have my own expenses now. But Emily's tuition. She's an adult, she can get a job like I did, I said, watching from afar as my family's situation unraveled. Dad took on extra shifts at his construction job, coming home exhausted every night. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I applied for a job at Burger Baron. I overheard Karen saying one evening when I stopped by to pick up some mail. You what? Dad responded, but you haven't worked in years. I don't want to flip burgers, but we don't have a choice, Karen said. Meanwhile, Emily was having her own meltdown. This is so unfair. I'm supposed to be focusing on school. Welcome to the real world, sis, I muttered under my breath. Despite the chaos, I made sure to support my mom. I secretly helped her set up an online business selling her handmade jewelry. Sarah, this website is amazing. How did you afford it? She asked. Don't worry about it, Mom. I'm just glad you're doing what you love. As weeks turned into months, Dad's calls became more desperate. Sarah, we're drowning here. Can't you help us just a little? I'm sorry, Dad, but I have my own bills to pay. How's Emily's job search going? She's struggling. No one will hire her, Dad said. I wonder why, I said, remembering how Emily had looked down on my part-time work. Despite the guilt, I stuck to my decision. I focused on my studies, acing exams and impressing my professors. Sarah, your latest paper was outstanding, Professor Chin told me. Have you considered applying for our summer research program? That would be amazing, I said. As I left campus that day, I saw another missed call from Dad. I hesitated, then put my phone away. They needed to learn, and I needed to stand firm. But how long could I keep this up? And when it was all over, would there be anything left of my family to salvage? 3 months flew by, and I decided it was time to face the music. I pulled up to Dad's house, bracing myself. The lawn was overgrown, and the house looked like it had seen better days. I barely knocked before the door swung open. Dad's face showed relief and desperation. Sarah, thank God you're back, he said. We've been. Save it, Dad. I'm here to talk, not to bail you out. I stepped inside and saw a mess, dishes piled high, clothes everywhere. In the living room, Karen and Emily were in a heated argument. This is all your fault. If you'd just gotten a job like Sarah said, Karen yelled. My fault? You're the one who married a man who can't even pay his own bills, Emily shot back. Hey, that's enough, both of you, I said. They turned, shocked to see me. Emily recovered first, her face twisting into a sneer. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence. How's the big city treating you, Miss High and Mighty? I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, Emily, I never left town. The room went silent. Dad looked like he'd seen a ghost. What do you mean you never left? I mean there was no job in California. I've been here the whole time, watching you all implode. Karen gasped. You lied to us. How could you? I shouted. How could you all do this? Talk about how you've treated me for years? I turned to Dad, my voice shaking. You always favored Emily. Everything I did was never enough. I paid your bills, kept this family afloat, and you had the audacity to ask me to give up my future for her? Dad stammered. I didn't realize. Save it. I cut him off. And you, Karen, you've been manipulating Dad since day one. Gold digger doesn't even begin to cover it. You've never worked a day in your life until now, have you? Karen's face turned red. How dare you? I've been a homemaker. You've been a leech. I shot back. And Emily, oh Emily, did you really think the world owed you a free ride? That you could coast through life on other people's hard work? Emily scoffed, but I saw uncertainty in her eyes. News flash, sis, the world doesn't care about your entitlement. It's time to grow up. Dad stepped forward, his eyes pleading. Sarah, please, we've learned our lesson. We'll do better, I promise. Just don't leave us like this. I took a deep breath. It's too late, Dad. I'm done. And so are you, with this house, at least. What do you mean? Dad asked, confused. The house is in my name, I said. I'm selling it. You have 30 days to find a new place. Karen shrieked. You can't do that. We'll be homeless. Should have thought of that before you tried to derail my life, I said coldly. And all those bills and subscriptions I've been paying? They're cancelled as of now. Emily started to cry for real this time. But where will we go? That's not my problem anymore, I said firmly. I'm cutting ties permanently. I've accepted a real job offer out of state. I'm starting fresh without any of you dragging me down. Dad fell to his knees, sobbing. Sarah, please, we're family. Give us another chance. We'll make it right, I swear. I felt a twinge of guilt but pushed it aside. Family doesn't.
Should I really work as a waitress all my life? It's enough already. Melissa complained and irritatedly threw the dishes from the tray into the sink, which clinked plaintively. No, I can't take it anymore. Oh, come on. Why are you getting angry again? Alana asked, trying to calm her friend. Not everyone can be rich. Some people live a simple life, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wasn't born to serve my whole life, Melissa persisted. That's it. I quit this place. And what will your husband say? Alana asked. Do you think he'll accept your decision? I don't care. I don't care what he thinks. When he got married, he promised to bring the whole world to me. Business, travels, money. I fell for it, in short. And what's the outcome? I'm slaving away here for pennies, and him? He should earn as he promised, or I'll leave him, Melissa said, and stormed out of the cafe kitchen, slamming the door loudly. In the evening, barely waiting for her husband to come home from work, Melissa pounced on him from the doorway. I can't take it anymore, Gabriel. I quit my job as a waitress today, and I'm not going back. Got it? Melissa propped her hands on her side and stood in a defiant pose, making it clear that her decision was not up for discussion. Gabriel was exhausted after his work, but seeing his wife, he knew that dinner wasn't going to happen anytime soon, and he was in for another quarrel. But he had long been planning his business, as he saw that his wife was dissatisfied with their life. He just wanted to work out the details a little more, but apparently he didn't have time. To avoid further upsetting his angry wife, he hurried to calm her down. Sit down, Melissa, Gabriel said, taking her soft hand and leading her into the kitchen. I actually have a plan. I was just going to think about it some more, but maybe it's time to get started. What plan? Melissa grumbled discontentedly. I came up with a business idea. I've been wanting to open a cafe where we'll make Turkish sweets for a long time. Remember how you liked baklava or rahat lukum on your honeymoon in Turkey? Melissa nodded. She was interested in the idea of starting her own business. Let's do it, she said, encouraged. But what do we need? Gabriel had a list of everything they needed for the business, and he had calculated everything they needed to get started in detail. He took out a loan, and the amount was substantial, so they had to put their car up for collateral, but the couple were both confident in the success of their venture. Finally, after 5 years together, "You've done something worthwhile," a pleased Melissa said. "We're opening tomorrow. I hope it goes well." They opened with great fanfare. They bought plenty of products. Initially, they decided to stand behind the counter by themselves to save on staff salaries. At first, things seemed to be going well. People came to the new place until a cafe opened up next door, where they also sold Turkish sweets. It was part of a large chain, and their prices were almost half of what Melissa and Gabriel charged. The couple tried to hold on. They did various promotions and came up with every trick to keep the business going. But their competitors simply destroyed them with their price. And one night the wiring short-circuited and the space they were renting caught fire. All their equipment was irreparably damaged. Melissa and Gabriel didn't have the money to repair or restore it. The business was closed, and they were left with an unpaid loan. Melissa took a job as a secretary, and Gabriel worked 2 shifts as a taxi driver to keep afloat. One day, Melissa complained to Alana, "How could I believe that fool? Where were my eyes when I married him?" "Come on, Melissa. Gabriel is a good guy, hard-working, decent, and not stupid. You failed, it happens. In some way, it's your guilt too." "Mine?" Melissa was surprised. "I'm just a woman. What's the demand on me?" "I'm tired of living with this useless man. His older sister died a week ago. She had cancer. And you know what? He brought her little daughter Tara to us, saying that she will live with us now. This is insane. Don't you understand what I'm talking about, Alana?" Melissa looked at her friend indignantly. "I hear you, don't shout." Alana wrinkled her face. "But what do you suggest? To put his niece in an orphanage? Poor Gabriel. I feel sorry for him." "You feel sorry for him? What about me? We already have loans," Melissa exclaimed, ignoring her friend's words. "Anyway, the boss has his eye on me. He invited me on a business trip. I'll start an affair with him. Let's see how it goes. I need to do something, otherwise my kind-hearted husband will do something else stupid." Alana didn't know what to say. Melissa amazed her with her frivolousness, but it was her business. Alana just shrugged. So Melissa started an affair with her boss, just as she was going. The man was almost 30 years older than her, a grumpy old man with a bulging stomach and a fleshy red nose. But it didn't bother Melissa at all. The most important thing for the woman was that he promised to buy her a new car and asked her to move with him to the capital as his business expanded. But Melissa couldn't decide leaving Gabriel so quickly. After all, he treated her well, gave her freedom, tried hard, worked as much as he could, and took care of his niece Tara, who Melissa didn't bother with at all. Nevertheless, after a little deliberation, she still decided to break up. Melissa did not want any explanations with her husband. She was not comfortable that he would beg her to stay, so she just packed her things while he was not at home and left, blocking her phone and leaving the note, "Don't seek me." She was sitting in the car in the front seat, and her lover was sitting next to her, behind the wheel, his hand with his fat little fingers on her leg. Melissa leaned back in the seat, stuck her hand out the window and smiled broadly. At last, she could take life into her own hands. The woman didn't plan to live with the old, nasty rich man forever. She planned to get money and gifts from him, settle in the capital, and then find someone younger. Coming home, Gabriel didn't immediately understand what had happened. But when he finally discovered his wife's disappearance, he was shocked. Little Tara reassured him. "Uncle Gabriel, don't worry. Aunt Melissa will definitely return." "Thank you, dear." Gabriel smiled sadly. "Your aunt has never disappeared like this before." Gabriel could not believe that Melissa had left of her own free will, without talking or explaining it to him. It occurred to him that maybe someone had even kidnapped her while he was away. He went to the police, but they just laughed and told him to wait until his unfaithful wife got tired of going out. In 27 years of his life, Gabriel had already experienced his second tragedy. First, his sister died, leaving her daughter under his care, and now his beloved wife left him. He couldn't understand or accept what was happening in his life. First his sister died, leaving her daughter under his care, and now his beloved wife left him. He couldn't understand or accept what was happening in his life. Besides his sister, he had no one. Their parents abandoned both of them when they were children, and they grew up in an orphanage. If it weren't for Tara, Gabriel didn't know whether he could survive such blows of fate or not. But the responsibility for the little girl didn't allow him to completely lose heart. He got up for work every day, did everything that was required like a robot, and fell asleep in the evening exhausted. A couple of years passed. This fall, Tara was supposed to go to school. Expenses were growing, but there was no income. In their small town, there were no places where one could earn more money. One day, Gabriel's old friend Tom called him, who had come to the capital a few years ago. "Gabriel, hi!" He cheerfully greeted him on the phone. "We haven't talked in 3 years. How are you, buddy?" "Slowly but surely," Gabriel replied. "I'm calling because, well, don't think anything bad. I just heard that your sister died, left her daughter, and then your wife disappeared. I was thinking about how to help you, Gabriel. I didn't call because I didn't even know what to say in such a situation. And now finally, I have a good topic. I'm offering you a job in the capital." "What kind of job, Tom?" Gabriel asked. He was inspired because he knew that Tom wouldn't suggest anything stupid. "I work for a serious businessman. He's expanding his staff and he needs good drivers. I immediately recommended you. He pays well for good work. You'll be able to move here, rent an apartment and find a good school for your niece. What do you say?" Gabriel, of course, agreed right away. He moved to the city with Tara, rented an apartment, and the girl enrolled in school. The niece had to grow up after her mother's death. The girl saw that her uncle was struggling, and she tried her best to be useful. So, by the age of 7, she could already make them breakfast or even iron her uncle's shirt for work. "Tara, you're my golden girl," Gabriel said, chewing on the sandwich made by his niece. "You even packed your backpack yourself. You got dressed, did your homework, and even made breakfast. Well done, my dear," he laughed. Gabriel liked his job. His boss, Mr. Bell, was very polite. He was a serious businessman, and in their first meet, he said that he always appreciated employees for their loyalty and good service, and didn't abandon them. And Gabriel knew that he would do his best not to let his boss down. In the house where he worked, he met Eleanor. She was a household assistant, a pretty young woman of 25. If Eleanor hadn't been flirting with Gabriel herself, he wouldn't have dared to approach her. In the end, the young people still became friends. Eleanor said that she came from a village where she was brought up by her grandparents. They were old now, and she decided to go to the city to find work to support herself and help them. Gabriel liked Eleanor. The girl was simple, open and kind. There are few people like her now. He told her his story about how he came to the point of raising his niece alone. "I would even say that I'm not bringing her up at all," Gabriel grinned. "It's more like she takes care of me." Eleanor really liked the new driver, and she gradually entered his life as only a woman could. She met Tara and immediately liked the little girl. And how could she not like this lovely child with the eyes of a mature woman? They became friends. Eventually, Eleanor began to help Tara with her homework, sometimes cooked dinner if Gabriel was late for work. They became friends. Eventually, Eleanor began to help Tara with her homework, sometimes cooked dinner if Gabriel was late from work, which happened often, and she stayed overnight when necessary. So, a year passed. One day, Mr. Bell asked to be driven to a party. "It's a big deal today, Gabriel," Mr. Bell said happily. "The deal is, and it finally worked out. I have been preparing the ground for 3 years to make everything come together." "Congratulations, Mr. Bell." Gabriel sincerely rejoiced for his boss. When they arrived at a huge mansion and drove inside, the boss got out and ordered Gabriel to follow him. "Come with me. I need you there. If I need to bring some documents from the car, I'll ask you. Everything needs to be done quickly, you understand? Before either party changes their mind." They approached the pool. The boss left Gabriel standing aside and waiting for him, and he went to the patio nearby where some big shots were sitting. Gabriel looked at the girls frolicking in the water and couldn't believe his eyes. Melissa was swimming in the water among the other girls. She had no swimsuit and was laughing loudly at the jokes of the 3 men who surrounded her. "Melissa?" Gabriel said, approaching the edge of the pool. How are you here?" He couldn't say more than that. Gabriel was in shock. Currently, he could barely even realize where he was. Melissa quickly jumped out of the pool, and while no one was paying attention to Gabriel, grabbed his hand and led him away. "Gabriel, hi!" It was clear that Melissa was also experiencing shock. She wasn't ready to meet her husband here. "You just calm down. Everything's all right." "All right," he said hoarsely. His voice disappeared from excitement. "You ran away without even explaining yourself. And you're here, naked with men? How did you get here?" Gabriel covered his face with his hands. He could not get over the shock. Melissa looked back, made sure no one was paying attention to them, and briefly chatted. "Gabriel, listen. I just couldn't leave you like that, you know. We've been together for 5 years. Then I met this rich old man. He fell in love with me and was going to move here. I thought he would help me get settled, and then I would leave him. But this scoundrel dumped me for a girl even younger. I literally had nothing to live on. I couldn't come back to you, but I wanted to." Melissa squeezed his hand and looked at him pleadingly. "But how? I thought you would dump me after my escape. In short, I went into escort services. They pay well here, but I don't want to live like this. Now that you know, I'm very sorry. Please forgive me and understand me, I beg you." Gabriel gazed at his wife, whom he had once deeply loved, and for whom he was willing to do anything. She had changed. Now he faced a stranger. Melissa was heavily made up, with unnaturally swollen lips and smudged black arrows from playing in the pool. She looked like a promiscuous woman. What does she look like? Gabriel chuckled to himself. She is like... Finally he spoke without looking at her, because it was disgusting to see her like this. Go to your wealthy friends quickly, because they miss you, or you won't get your salary. And he pushed Melissa towards the pool. Oh, Gabriel, why are you so rude? You're still my husband, said Melissa. Not a husband to you, Gabriel said through gritted teeth. Now he didn't want anyone at the villa to see that they were connected. You left without saying goodbye. You're nothing to me now, just a misunderstanding that happened in my life. Move away from me before I throw you in the pool. Gabriel breathed out forcefully, straightened his crumpled jacket from Melissa grabbing at the lapels, and walked slowly, as if walking along the pool. Melissa stood frozen, watching her husband leave. She knew he wouldn't forgive her, but her hurt pride didn't want to admit defeat. The woman was used to Gabriel always being apologetic and guilty in their union. Melissa ran, stumbling on her heels and almost falling, grabbing onto his back. "Gabriel, forgive me!" she shouted. Now everyone noticed this. It was clear that something was happening between them. "Is everything okay?" Mr. Bell asked Gabriel. He understood without words that this girl was probably his driver's ex, and saw that he was embarrassed about the situation. "Hey, lady, are you taking liberties?" the boss asked Melissa, and then turned to his partner and added, "Maybe you should send her back from where you got her. It bothers me that drunk women are harassing my driver." "Oh, come on." The partner shook himself and beckoned the quiet Melissa over with his finger. "Come here, my star." Melissa had no choice but to obey. "Do you need something from my guest's driver? Have you nothing else to do?" the owner of the mansion asked Melissa. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman babbled, while her girlfriends discreetly twisted their fingers at her temple. "No one wanted to lose an evening with such wealthy clients. I just got confused. I thought it was my missed brother." "I understand. Well, go take a sauna. They will be coming to you soon," the owner of the mansion said patronizingly, slapping Melissa on the backside. As she walked into the house, she looked imploringly at Gabriel, but he stood calmly. He no longer cared about his ex-wife. She got what she wanted. She left him with a child, leaving all the debts on his shoulders. She often accused him of not being able to support her properly. "I hope you have enough money and entertainment now," Gabriel muttered and turned towards the garden. He didn't want to think about that fallen woman anymore. She died for him 3 years ago. After that incident, Gabriel finally let himself live. Apparently, deep down, he had believed that his wife would return to him, and they would be happy together. When Gabriel realized that he had been cruelly deceived and manipulated, it was as if a mountain had been lifted from his shoulders. He looked at Eleanor in a new light. "She's so beautiful," Gabriel thought, looking at the girl, "and she's done so much for me and Tara." The young people started dating. Eleanor finally got his attention as a woman, not as a friend. 6 months later, they got married. A couple of years later, Eleanor suggested that Gabriel move to the countryside and build a farm with natural products. They saved money for several years while working for Mr. Bell. The village was only 100 kilometers from the city, so they could quickly supply farm products to the capital. Mr. Bell supported the idea and even helped them find customers for their products. "Do you remember I said I always appreciate good work?" she asked Gabriel. So promote your business. Fresh, rural products without chemicals are a trend of our time. I'll be the first customer and recommend you to everyone. This time, everything worked out for Gabriel. That's how this story ended. And you, my dear viewers, always remember that your people will be with you in sorrow and in joy, and those who abandon you in a difficult moment are just temporary companions, which are not worth crying about. And maybe not right away, but if you're on the right path, fate will smile at you eventually, and you will definitely succeed. Elena tried to call her husband all day, but he did not answer. Harvey went away on another business trip, and Elena had to take care of the house again. The absence of her husband from home had become a norm, to which the woman could not get used to. But this time their son Philip got sick. He had a high fever which was very difficult to bring down, and Elena more than ever needed help. Tired of listening to the endless long beeps, Elena rushed to her son. Philip was asleep, and the woman affectionately stroked her son on the head. Suddenly the phone rang, and Elena quickly jumped out into the next room so as not to wake her son with the conversation. "Harvey, why aren't you answering the phone? Are you not interested in how we are here without you at all? Philip is sick." "Well, don't start. You know I have had a lot of work to do. I can't just drop everything and stay home with you. Don't you understand?" resented the spouse. The woman sighed heavily and asked when he would arrive, but he only briefly replied that soon and hung up. He came only a couple of days later, but not a week later he left again on a business trip. One day Elena was returning from the grocery store and met Sasha, Harvey's colleague, with whom she was well acquainted. "Sasha, when will this end? Harvey doesn't get out of business trips. Is there no one else to send?" "Maybe there are unmarried, childless employees in your company. Harvey left again, although he recently had returned from a business trip," complained Elena. "Elena, what business trips are you talking about? Nobody goes on business trips in our company, and Harvey is at work. I saw him myself this morning," surprisingly replied Sasha. Elena was stunned. She took her purchases home, and then at the end of the day she called a cab and went to work to her husband. Hidden behind the tinted glass of the car, she was watching from a distance as her husband came out with some spectacular beauty, opened the door of his car in front of her, and drove in the direction opposite to their home. All night long Elena could not sleep, thinking about how mean her husband had been to her. She could not understand why he had betrayed her and chosen another woman over her. When Harvey returned, Elena greeted him with a question. "Why did you come back so early this time? Maybe because you're a great professional, or perhaps because you have been lying to me all this time." "Well, how quickly you figured it out," answered Harvey sneeringly. "So that's even better. Pack your things and get out of here. I'm tired of your hysterics, and I'm tired of meeting Monica in hotels too." Elena felt herself bursting with pain and resentment, but she tried to restrain herself and simply said that she would leave, but with Philip. Her spouse's response stunned her. "Sure, take him with you. No one is going to mess with him here. Did you ask me when you were intending to get pregnant? No. So now you should babysit him yourself," grinned Harvey. "That's it. Monica will arrive in an hour, so there should not even be a reminder of you by that time." "But where will we go?" said Elena, and couldn't hold back her tears. "It's night and our son is still weak after his illness." "I don't care, and keep in mind I won't tolerate any tantrums," coldly replied Harvey. So Elena found herself on the street with her little son. She tried to call her friend Carol, but she did not answer. Anyway, Elena decided to go to her, and only when she was already near her apartment building, Carol called and said that she would come only tomorrow since she was staying overnight at her parents'. Elena began to think that it was necessary to find at least a hotel, but then the phone pitifully beeped and, finally discharged, turned off. The woman sat down on the bench near the entryway in despair. She suddenly had a severe headache, and a hungry Philip began whimpering and begging for food. "Mama, I'm hungry." He was rubbing Elena's sleeve. "Mummy, let's go home. I'm hungry. I'm tired. Mummy." "Be patient for a little while, my dear. I'll think of something. Let me cradle you for a while." The little boy climbed into her lap, snuggled up to her shoulder, but after a minute he started crying again and begging to go home. Thomas parked his car and headed for the entrance. He heard a woman and a baby talking and could not pass by. He said hello and asked if they needed help. "No, thank you, we don't need anything." Elena shook her head. "But maybe you know where I can get some food around here at this time? All the stores are closed and I don't know what to do," she asked, trying hard not to cry. "Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" asked Thomas, looking intently at Elena. "If not, let's go to my place. You can have a home-cooked meal and get some rest." The woman stood up frightened, cradled her son, feeling that the stranger would hurt them, and flatly refused his offer. Thomas, realizing that he had probably frightened the woman, began to reassure her. "Please don't get me wrong. My name is Thomas. I'm married. My wife is waiting at home. I just want to help. Come with me. It's been a hard day for you and me. Let's sleep on it." "Mom, come on. I'm hungry." Understanding what the strange man was offering, Philip pulled Mother by the sleeve toward the entrance. "Well, let's go, if it's really comfortable," agreed Elena tiredly. They all went to his apartment together. The door was opened by his wife, who was clearly not happy to see her husband with a strange woman and child. "Holly, meet our guests. They're in trouble and they need help. What are we having for dinner tonight?" "Philip, as I understand it, is hungry." The woman smiled wryly and dragged her husband into the kitchen, where she immediately made a scandal. "Are you out of your mind? I'm not going to feed all the beggars you're going to pick up around town." "Holly, speak quietly. It's not nice," said Thomas, trying to calm down his wife. "I am at home and I will be saying what I want and how I want," shouted the woman even louder. Thomas looked out into the corridor, afraid that Elena and her son would hear their conversation, but they were gone. Holly rushed to check whether everything was in place, and Thomas, giving his wife a stern look, took his jacket and keys and ran out of the apartment. He caught up with Elena on the street. "Wait, please, Elena, forgive me for Holly. I do not know what's wrong with her today. I know where you will sleep tonight. Let me take you there." The woman had no strength left to argue, and she agreed. Thomas got Elena and her son into the car, and on the way told them that he had an apartment that he was renting out. The tenants had temporarily moved out, and Elena could spend the night there until the friend she had come to visit returned. And then Elena burst into tears and shared with him everything that had happened to her. Listening to the woman's story, Thomas was stunned and could not believe that this was even possible. He was quiet for a while and then said, "You can live in the apartment as long as you need, and don't worry, everything will be fine." Thomas stopped outside a convenience store, bought groceries, and soon they were in the place. After a hearty meal, when Philip was already asleep, Elena closed the door behind Thomas and cried again, but already from gratitude to this kind and sympathetic man. Meanwhile, a scandal with his wife was waiting for Thomas at home again, and in the morning, Holly, willing to teach her spouse a lesson, went to her mother. But the effect was the opposite. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt free. He had been tired of Holly's tantrums for a long time, and now finally realised that he and his wife were just putting up with each other and living out of habit. The next day the man stopped by Elena with huge bags from the supermarket. The woman invited him in, and just then Philip ran out of the room. "Hey, kiddo," smiled Thomas. "Look what I've brought you," he said, and handed Philip a big bag of presents. The boy looked into the package and happily disappeared into the room with it, but he immediately returned. Dragging the bag behind him, he ran up to Thomas and, looking up at him, said, "Thank you, dear sir," and ran away again with the gifts. The adults laughed. "Thomas, you shouldn't have done that," blushed Elena. "What's a child going to do here without toys? So there's nothing wrong with that," laughed Thomas in response and shrugged his shoulders. Not knowing how else to thank him for what he had done for them, Elena invited him for tea. "You know, I always wanted children, but my wife refused. I grew up in a big family. I have 5 brothers and many nephews, so it's so much fun and easy for me with kids," confessed Thomas. "Well, with Philip, you can forget about peace and quiet," laughed Elena. As if in confirmation of his mother's words, Philip immediately appeared and pulled Thomas with him into the living room to show him the tower he had built. Thomas played with the boy for over an hour, and Elena, watching how well he interacted with Philip, was very surprised because Harvey had never paid so much attention to his son. She was writing articles for magazines on her old laptop. After she went on maternity leave, she was offered to work remotely, and with the illness of her son, she fell off the schedule a little, and now she was catching up. Thomas came to visit them almost every day, and Philip missed him very much when he didn't show up for a long time. One day the man came late in the evening and said he had filled out a divorce with his wife. "I'm tired of scandals and the shouting," he explained, and picking up Philip, who had run up to him, tossed the boy up. "I want to play with Philip instead." The little boy was laughing with delight, and Thomas suddenly turned to Elena and asked seriously, "Will you take me into your family?" "Yes," answered instead of his mother Philip, who almost couldn't breathe from laughter and joy, while Elena leaned her head against the wall, smiling embarrassed. After getting a divorce, Elena and Thomas got married, and soon Philip had a little sister. 10 years passed. One day, Elena drove her new car, a gift from Thomas for their wedding anniversary, into a gas station. Rolling down the window, she handed the unkempt-looking gas station attendant a few bills and asked for a full tank of gas. Elena stared at the man, not believing her eyes. It was Harvey, but he did not recognize his ex-wife, and gratefully took the money and bustled around the expensive car. In the evening, Elena called the same Sasha and found out the news about Harvey. It turns out that several years ago, Monica persuaded him to sell his apartment and move in with her. With the proceeds, he bought her an expensive car. They went on several expensive journeys. After that, Monica found another man and left him. Thus Harvey was left on the street. Unable to withstand the hardships, he began to drink, was fired, and since then he has been living in a storage unit at the gas station where he worked. Elena hung up the phone and thought about his fate. For a moment she felt sorry for Harvey, but she quickly dismissed these thoughts, thinking that everyone got what he deserved according to his actions. Martha walked through the mall and smiled, enjoying life. Many people do not appreciate the fact of birth and tend to blame their failures on their parents or fate, but Martha always knew that the main thing is life, and everything else can be achieved if you have the desire and purpose. Immersed in her thoughts, Martha did not notice a stranger with a cup of coffee in his hands, who almost knocked her down. Barely recovered from the unexpected encounter, Martha realized that her cream-coloured blouse was hopelessly ruined. The girl smiled modestly and looked calmly at the young man, who was apologizing fearfully and didn't know how to make amends. "That's all right," she said. "If I can't wash it, I'll be wearing it at home during cleaning." The man was greatly surprised that the woman did not make a scandal and demand a refund, and he looked at Martha with interest. "As an apology for my awkwardness, I invite you to dinner at the restaurant tonight," he said suddenly, with such a disarming smile that Martha could not refuse him. They exchanged phone numbers, and Sebastian offered to drive his new acquaintance home so she did not have to go in a stained blouse on the subway. The evening at the restaurant was wonderful. Martha and Sebastian proved to have much in common, and they decided to get to know each other better and perhaps continue their relationship. By Martha's appearance and her outfit, Sebastian immediately thought she was a strong and independent woman and also earned a decent living. And when she paid for herself, he was finally convinced that he had not made a wrong choice. They met almost every day since then. Sebastian often boasted that he was an excellent marketer and that his companions tried to poach him by offering him a higher salary. But he only stayed in his old job because he was uncomfortable in leaving, as he had got the job through friendship and did not want to set up the person who had helped him. More than once he tried to ask Martha where she was working, but she always avoided answering, saying that the important thing was not a person's position, but what he had in his soul and heart. After a few months of dating, Sebastian started talking about a future together, and he even planned to introduce Martha to his parents and friends. The young woman did not want to rush into it because she had already had the experience of a failed relationship once, and now she was afraid to make a mistake again. But Martha could not resist her feelings for long because she fell in love with Sebastian, and deep down she dreamed of becoming his wife. One evening, the couple were supposed to go to a concert, but Martha stayed at work longer than usual and asked Sebastian to pick her up. The man was very excited because he finally had a chance to find out where his beloved was working. Judging by the fact that she gave the address of one of the city's most prestigious business centres, Sebastian realized that Martha held quite a high position there. Sebastian arrived earlier than scheduled, and after getting the number of the office from the security guard, hurried up to the 5th floor. As Sebastian pushed open the glass door, he froze on the threshold. His beloved was cleaning the floor, diligently working with a mop in front of him. Disappointment, together with some inexplicable feelings, filled Sebastian's soul. "Cleaning woman? Are you serious?" He grinned and felt the crumble of his naive dreams in which he had imagined this beautiful woman in the chair of, at least, the director or head of the department. Martha looked at Sebastian in surprise. She had not expected him to come so early and asked him to wait for a little until she finished cleaning the hallway. She acted calm and natural, as if nothing had happened, and Sebastian became suddenly angry. He started laughing so hysterically that Martha left the mop, straightened up, and looked at the young man with an incomprehensible look. "Are you all right?" she asked. You tricked me good, laughed Sebastian. That's why you didn't tell me where you worked, huh? And you made that circus at the restaurant on the first day. You paid for dinner yourself. You got expensive clothes somewhere. You must have rented it. I really thought you were a successful woman. But you're just a miserable cleaning lady. The man continued to laugh hysterically, unable to calm down. And when he finally managed to pull himself together, he looked at Martha with such a contemptuous look that the woman even shuddered with horror. That sweet, attentive man, with his warm and tender eyes, suddenly disappeared. Instead, an unfamiliar and unpleasant man stood in front of her, a man from whom she wanted to run away and never see again. Martha's eyes tinged with sorrow, but she did her best to contain her emotions. And of course you can forget about the concept. I'm lucky that I didn't have time to introduce you to my friends. Otherwise, I would have embarrassed myself in front of them. I am disgusted at the thought that with those hands you used to scrub toilets. You hugged me afterward, he said with disgust, and headed for the exit. Martha waited with difficulty until he had left the office, and, leaning tiredly against the wall, she sank slowly to the floor and let her tears flow. She was hurt by Sebastian's words, but most of all, it was painful that she had once more trusted a man who did not deserve it at all. Soon Martha calmed down. She suddenly realized how right she had been in letting the cleaning lady leave work early today. The elderly woman had her daughter in the hospital, and her son-in-law was away on a business trip, so she had to pick up her granddaughter from kindergarten that day. Martha treated all of her employees like family and was always ready to help them. And at the end of that workday she was carrying water for her flowers and accidentally spilled and had to clean up. Now she was glad of that, because it helped her really get to know the man with whom she planned to tie her life together. Several months passed. Sebastian could hardly calm down and get over the idea that he was in a relationship with the cleaning lady, and was furious with Martha for hiding the truth for so long. He was ashamed in front of his friends, and to all their questions about his unexpected separation from the woman he had loved, he only joked and said that they did not agree in character. One day the boss sent him to conclude a contract in the very agency where Martha was working. Sebastian was anxious that he would accidentally meet her, and she would decide to talk to him. He felt that he could not survive such an embarrassment, but this contract was too important for his career, and Sebastian could not refuse. His task was to negotiate a discount, and his boss definitely made it clear that his career would depend on how he handled it. Sebastian was focused and tense as he rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, but when he entered the office, he shuddered and was confused. He saw the cleaning lady in front of him and thought it was Martha. But then he looked more closely and realized that it was an elderly woman. Sebastian relaxed a little and told the secretary that he had an appointment with the director. The woman smiled and walked him into the office. Sebastian confidently opened the door, but then he froze on the spot and felt a cold sweat run down his back, and his mouth went dry. He looked at the woman standing with her back to him, wiping the dust from the leaves of the flowers, and could not believe that it was Martha. Sebastian hesitated, not knowing what to do, and then Martha finally turned around. She was surprised to see Sebastian because before she had been in contact with another marketing specialist, but she made no sign that she recognized him. Martha greeted him coldly and nonchalantly, as if they had never had a close relationship, pain, disappointment, and that humiliating last conversation. She took the documents from Sebastian and sat down in her chair, scrutinizing the contents of the papers. The man carefully sat down in the chair opposite, watching Martha and thinking bitterly about how stupid he had been, not figuring out the situation and losing his chance to be together with such a successful woman. Unable to refrain himself, Sebastian asked the main question. Why did it all happen between us like that? What does it matter now? Asked Martha, a counter question without taking her eyes off the papers. It has happened and nothing can be changed, she added, and smiled politely but very coldly. Sebastian nodded sadly, realizing that Martha was right. She could never forgive him and forget what he had done. Finishing studying the contract, Martha looked up at Sebastian and measured him with such an icy stare that the man shuddered and realized at once that he could hardly negotiate a discount with Martha. The amount of work is massive, so I'm not prepared to sign a contract like that. The woman shook her head. We're the best promotion agency, and you should increase the contract sum by at least 50% just to start the discussion. Sebastian realized that he had blown the deal. Losing his temper, he began begging Martha for forgiveness. He asked her not to act so harshly to him, reminded her how good they had been together, and tried to persuade her to think again. It was no longer a question of a discount. He asked her to at least agree to the terms that had previously been negotiated and written down in the current version of the contract, but Martha was adamant. Leaving the office, he went outside and doomfully called his boss. The man immediately asked what kind of discount he had got, expecting to hear whatever, but not what Sebastian had reported. She wants to increase the cost of the contract by 50%, Sebastian admitted, and mentally prepared himself for a reprimand from the chief. Are you kidding? How tired I am of you! That's it! I'll never hire anyone by acquaintance again. I expect you tomorrow morning with a letter of resignation. There were short beeps on the phone, and Sebastian realized that this time he had made an irreparable mistake, and his career was definitely over. He used to tell Martha about his successes, while in reality Sebastian was a mediocre specialist. He made many mistakes in his work, and only thanks to his acquaintances he managed to get a job in a good company. Now he had no idea who would take him to such a good position with a high salary, and thought that most likely he would have to go to work as a loader or worse, a janitor. And at that moment he remembered vividly the hurt look Martha had given him when he had been laughing at her, and he felt hurt and ashamed of what he had done. But he could do nothing about it. Peter had lived since birth in a large 5-story building that, when first built 50 years ago, was filled with noisy young families brimming with plans. As the years passed, families grew, children were born and grandparents moved in. Some residents left, others arrived, and everyone knew each other intimately. Children grew up under the watchful eyes of their neighbours, sometimes even being raised together. The Moore family faced the same scrutiny as everyone else. Floyd Moore was a local, having grown up here as a second-generation resident. His wife, Miriam, however, was considered an outsider. Despite years of living in the Republic, as locals jokingly called their building, Miriam had never truly integrated. She avoided the communal benches, never discussed neighbourhood news, neither visited nor hosted anyone, and lived as if separated from others by an invisible barrier. Floyd, her husband, was her complete opposite. Cheerful and outgoing, he was always ready to discuss anything from football matches to pickle recipes. He was the neighbourhood's unofficial favourite. For 10 years, Miriam and Floyd Moore had built their life together. Floyd was a long-distance truck driver, often covering thousands of kilometres in a single trip. He'd return home for brief periods, cherishing these weekend trips like holidays, trying to squeeze in as much time together as possible before departing again for 2 or 3 weeks. When Floyd returned home from another voyage, the neighbours tried to hint at something vague. "Still travelling, Floyd? While your Miriam sits alone? Well, it's up to you, of course, but temptation isn't far away." Floyd wagged his eyebrows playfully, winked at his elderly neighbours, and, unable to contain himself, laughed out loud. At home, he kissed Miriam and said, "Miriam, we need a child urgently. Do you hear? Our neighbours are already warning me that you might stray." Miriam looked at her husband with transparent light grey eyes and remained silent. The subject was painful. She knew how desperately Floyd wanted a son, and she herself wanted a child, but year after year passed in fruitless attempts. Floyd remained optimistic, declaring that everything would be fine, but Miriam felt she was depriving her husband of happiness he could have with someone else. She blamed herself for their childlessness. From birth she had been weak, frequently ill, with fragile lungs. Even as an adult, she wasn't particularly strong, though she'd learned to manage her asthma without anyone noticing. She caught colds and suffered migraines like everyone else, just more frequently and severely. And suddenly, it did happen. First came a fleeting thought, which she dismissed as improbable. Then it resurfaced, again and again. The thought transformed into a suspicion she dared not acknowledge. And finally, hope emerged, shy at first, then brilliant, growing into certainty. She was pregnant. There was no doubt about it. They both were overjoyed. To stay close to his wife, Floyd refused long-distance travel during the second half of her term. "I can't go," he'd reply to business trip proposals. "I'm in the 6th month," he'd add proudly. Miriam's pregnancy was difficult, as expected. She spent most of her time in hospitals, and at home she was nearly always bedridden. The baby arrived on schedule, but was tiny and weak. "No matter, the important thing is he's a boy, and it means he is a fighter," Floyd encouraged, trying not to dwell on the baby's tiny weight or the worried expressions of the doctors, who made little effort to hide their concern. "The main thing is he's here. Small, but he'll grow." However, the newborn's small size wasn't the main problem. From the very beginning, the baby was plagued by every imaginable ailment: dermatitis, conjunctivitis, otitis, dysbacteriosis, allergies. It seemed their child had been struck by every possible infant malady. But even that wasn't all. Miriam, we need to have a serious discussion. The elderly doctor looked at her intently. Your baby's condition has stabilized. We've managed to control the major symptoms. I could recommend discharge, but... He paused, removed his glasses and wearily rubbed his eyes. Miriam's heart suddenly thundered in her chest. Your son has been diagnosed with a congenital condition. Tracheomalacia. It's a softening of the cartilage of the trachea, to put it simply. You've probably noticed that your child coughs, sometimes noisily, and breathes unevenly. I must tell you that this disease is quite rare and not very well studied. There are no immediate dangers, but don't expect an easy life, especially in the first year and a half or 2 years. Tell me, Doctor? Miriam swallowed the lump in her throat with difficulty. And this tracheomalacia, he has it because of me? Because of my asthma? Don't blame yourself, Miriam. It's pointless. The doctor got up from the table and walked over to the window. I've already told you that this disease is not fully understood. There are, of course, indications of its hereditary nature, but your son's illness has nothing to do with yours. The boy was named Peter. Well, what else? Floyd smiled. Peter means winner. We have many things to overcome. And they started overcoming. When crying, the baby would immediately begin to cough and breathe noisily with effort. At first, Miriam called emergency services in fits of panic. She thought little Peter was suffocating. But gradually, as she grew accustomed to the situation, she became calmer and more composed. Still, it wasn't easy. Peter lagged far behind his peers in height and weight. He reached all the normal baby milestones, but much later than others. He didn't walk until age 2, and even then with great difficulty. By that time, his condition had stabilized. He had learned to breathe properly and avoid triggering attacks. Remarkably early, the boy understood what he could and couldn't do. However, nature, as if compensating for its cruelty, blessed the baby with exceptional intelligence. And so he grew, quiet, small, thin, very much like Miriam, and intelligent. From his father, he inherited only his hair colour and lively, cheerful brown eyes, which seemed improper on his thin, pale face. Miriam devoted her entire life to her son. Until he was 2, she never left his side, holding his hand even as he slept. Later, when he grew stronger, she looked around and realized that during those 2 years, the world had changed, and Floyd had changed the most. His former openness and cheerful disposition had vanished. He became sullen and withdrawn. In their conversation, he would speak only a few meaningless words before hurrying away, as if dreading questions about his life and family. He was rarely home, volunteering for the longest, most distant journeys. It's better this way, he would explain to himself, eyes downcast. Peter needs quiet, peace and fresh air. And I smoke, and well, it's less trouble for Miriam. She won't have to feed me, and everything else. And what kind of life is this? Yes, Floyd had dreamed of a son who would be his continuation, his mirror image, his life's purpose. He had longed to see his son immediately after birth, believing the baby would recognize and smile at him instantly. He had wanted to spend every minute with his son, to toss him in the air, run barefoot through wet grass, sit him in his truck's cab, teach him to swim, play football, ride a bicycle, and share countless other father-son moments. But reality proved far different. He first saw his son at nearly 2 months old. Instead of the chubby, rosy-cheeked baby he had imagined, he found a tiny, wrinkled, bluish face that looked more elderly than infant-like. For a long time, the baby could not even be held in arms, let alone anything else. When Miriam and the baby came home, the flat turned into a real infirmary, where they struggled endlessly with diseases that seemed to pass from one to another. When they discovered Peter had congenital lung problems, it became clear they would need to forget about active games and sports for many years. Even fresh air had to be carefully measured and controlled. But the most terrible thing was losing Miriam. For many years, Floyd had cherished her quiet tenderness, her shy, slightly timid character. He had loved discovering her anew each time. He loved his wife. To him, she had always been desired and loved. But now, everything had changed. She had been completely absorbed by the baby, without a trace, not even realizing it. She belonged to his son, and for him, Floyd, there was nothing left, not a single drop. Exhausted by sleeplessness, feeding, endless procedures, and constant fears for the baby, Miriam was more like a ghost than a woman. She had no energy left for her husband. She seemed to remember his existence only on those rare days when he appeared in the flat, returning from a voyage. Floyd tried to adapt, to endure, telling himself that everything would improve, that it was worth waiting, that Peter would grow up and become healthier, and Miriam would come to her senses, or rather, become herself again, not merely an extension of a sick baby. And Peter did grow up, becoming more independent and stronger, but the relationship between Miriam and Floyd never recovered. They lived together for some time, or rather, existed side by side. Floyd came home, brought money, did small repairs around the house, and timidly played with Peter, who looked warily at his father and seized every opportunity to retreat to his mother. Miriam, with a guilty look, prepared her husband's favourite dishes, washed clothes, left his shampoo on the edge of the bathtub, and, saying good night with lowered eyes, went to sleep in her son's room. When Peter turned 4, Floyd couldn't bear it any more. He sat in the kitchen talking, while Miriam stood with her back to him, staring out the window and fidgeting with the curtain. "Miriam, forgive me. I know I'm at fault, but I can't go on like this. I'm a healthy man, not old yet. You see, I don't want to... I can't cheat on you, but I can't live like this anymore. I came up with everything. You'll stay here. I'll bring money, pay for whatever you need, help you." The woman remained silent as he caught his breath and continued. "I'm a scoundrel, aren't I, leaving you with a sick child and so many problems. But I don't want to leave you. I just don't think we can live together anymore. I mean, you and me. You can't either, can you? Or rather, you don't want to, do you? Miriam, why don't you say anything?" Driven mad by her persistent silence, he snapped into a shout at the last sentences. "Don't shout, you'll wake Peter," Miriam said, still not turning her head. Floyd rose and went to pack his things. Miriam was left alone with her son. Floyd visited a couple of times a month, sometimes more often, speaking to his son and Miriam in empty pleasantries, fixing a socket or an iron before leaving an envelope of money on the kitchen table. Peter grew up, and thanks to both nature and his mother's titanic efforts, was almost healthy by age 7. But physically, he still looked more like a 5 or 6-year-old girl than a 7-year-old boy. With inner trepidation, Miriam enrolled him in a regular school. "Don't worry, your child just needs social adaptation. You must have noticed he only talks to you. That's not healthy," the child psychologist at the clinic told her authoritatively. At school, the contrast between Peter and the other children was so stark that Miriam's heart sank. But the boy, understanding his mother's concerns, responded with remarkable maturity. "Mum, don't worry. Everything will be fine. I'll try to be normal, like everyone else, and stay strong." He tried very hard, especially since he was intelligent, read better than any other first grader, had an excellent memory, knew a great deal, and wrote in large, careful, and rather confident handwriting. But children are cruel, and his appearance invited teasing. Peter was very thin, and at least half a head shorter than anyone else in class. He had pale, translucent skin with visible veins, slightly protruding ears that reddened at the slightest worry, and thin, almost colourless lips. He spoke in a quiet, apologetic voice, moved timidly and uncertainly, all of which made him seem even smaller and weaker than he truly was. Nobody wanted to be his friend, so Peter sat alone at his desk by the window and wandered the school corridors by himself during breaks. But he never told his mother about his difficulties at school. "It's fine, Mum," he would reply with a smile when she asked about his day. He wanted to be strong and tried his best to live up to that ideal. Men never complain and always solve their problems themselves, he thought, so he stayed silent and tried to manage on his own. By 7th grade, he was the top student, despite frequent illnesses due to his weak lungs and susceptibility to colds. But his academic excellence didn't improve his popularity. Instead, his classmates envied him and sought explanations for his success. "Of course his grades are inflated. He's sick and pitiful," they would say. Peter desperately wanted his peers to accept him, to share their interests, concerns, fears and joys. He would do anything for this acceptance, help others cheat on tests, write their reports and assignments, even volunteer to answer for the whole class at the blackboard, if possible. His classmates took advantage of his help, but never offered friendship outside of lessons. That day, like always, he walked home from school alone. His route took him past an old abandoned house. This district was a favourite playground for local boys. Peter had long been drawn to it, like a magnet. Of course, he didn't expect anyone would suddenly invite him to join their games, but he still wanted to glimpse this fascinating world hidden from adults. Peter looked around nervously, as if his mother might suddenly appear and spoil his plan. But the street was empty, so he walked timidly between the houses. After 3 minutes, moving away from the street, he found himself in a narrow alley between old buildings with rusty iron gates. "Oh, who's that?" The voice came from somewhere above his head. Peter looked up. At the gate of the house nearest to him stood a rather tall and sturdy boy. Peter knew him. His name was Tom, and he was known throughout the school as a troublemaker. Tom was a year older than Peter, though both were in 7th grade, since Tom had repeated a year. The tough, impudent kid had built up what he considered a serious reputation, surrounded by similar-minded followers. "Well, well, well, who do we have here? Oh, look, guys, it's Peter, the sissy. What are you doing here? Who gave you permission? Only real boys can hang out here. Guys like you are forbidden. And if any of you come here, you have to pay a fine. Right, boys?" Tom's question was met with nasty, sycophantic laughter from 2 boys who had appeared nearby. "Come on, Peter, pay up. You must have something interesting in your rucksack. Nerds like you always carry money. Hand it over. You don't need it anyway." Tom laughed, his comrades joining in, delighted by their leader's taunt. "No, he won't do it willingly," the guy concluded, watching Peter take a few steps back. "We'll have to do expropriation." "Expropriation," Peter corrected. "Clever, but now you'll get it." Tom spat hatefully, Realizing Peter wasn't afraid of him at all, he hesitated briefly, but knowing this would damage his image as a tough leader, he barked, "Guys, move in! Dan, you take right, Greg left! Hold him down while I search his bag." "Leave him alone!" A ringing voice suddenly cut through the air. "Listen up, Tom. Get away from him, or you'll regret it." "Oh, look, guys, our little pet has a defender," the boy sneered. "Bonnie the Knight, move along, this isn't your business." Tom genuinely wanted to resolve things peacefully with Bonnie, who had suddenly appeared. Though she was a girl, she had earned a reputation for being more boyish than most boys. She fought fiercely and bravely, with strength few expected from a girl. This often caught her opponents off guard. They underestimated her. Having tangled with Bonnie before, Tom wouldn't make that mistake. He decided to take the noble approach. "Listen, Bonnie, go your own way. Don't meddle in men's affairs, and—" "Men's affairs?" the girl snorted. "You call yourselves men? Real men don't gang up 3 against 1. You asked for it. Now you'll get it too. Greg, watch this weak. Don't let him escape. Dan, come from the right and grab her. But be careful, she fights like a cat." The 2 boys circled around, approaching Bonnie from both sides. The girl quickly assessed her chances, reached a grim conclusion, and made an unexpected move. She let out a piercing shriek that made everyone's ears ring. The boys ducked instinctively, but quickly recovered, even as Bonnie continued her sharp cry. "So what?" Tom mocked. "What did you think that would accomplish? Think that would scare us?" "No," replied Bonnie cheerfully, putting her fists on her hips. "But this will help." From behind the old house came quick footsteps and voices of several adult men. "It was around here. Definitely close. Heard a scream, sounded like a girl." The men spoke excitedly. Within seconds, 3 men appeared. "What's going on here?" An elderly man, arriving first, confronted the boys. "Who screamed? Was it you, girl? What happened?" "I saw a mouse, got petrified," Bonnie mumbled, glancing at the boys. "Sorry." "A mouse? Nearly gave me a heart attack." The man rubbed his chest and looked sternly at everyone. "Get out of here. This is no place for games." The boys, led by Tom, immediately obeyed, leaving only the sound of distant footsteps in their wake. The men departed, muttering under their breath and wagging fingers at Bonnie and Peter. Bonnie turned to look at the boy she'd rescued, studying him as if trying to remember something. "Ah, you're from 7th, right? I never see you here, and I don't even know your name." "I'm Peter." "Peter, huh? Well, hello again, my name is Bonnie," she replied cheerfully. "Why did you come here anyway?" "Just curious," Peter shrugged. "How about you?" "Coming from school. This is a shortcut." The girl gestured toward the narrow gap between houses. "Come on, I'll show you out, before someone else shows up on your way." She grabbed her rucksack from the grass and headed toward the street. "Shall we? Listen, you live in building 19, right? I heard there's a guy there with an awesome German Shepherd who's selling puppies. Could you get his number?" For Bonnie, chatting with a boy from school was natural and ordinary. For Peter, it was momentous. For the first time in his life, he was not expected to answer at the blackboard or give answers on a test paper. She just talked to him like a regular boy. "All right then." Bonnie stopped near the turn into the courtyard of the neighbouring house. "There's my house. Bye, Peter. I've got to go. We've got lots of algebra to do, and I can't get this wretched algebra into my head at all. I'll be up all night trying to understand it, but then my mother will come from work and start yelling that I don't want to learn." Bonnie sighed painfully. "Wait, Bonnie, "Let me help you with algebra," he offered involuntarily. "Well, why not? But what's in it for you? To mess around with me? Mind you, I'm warning you right away. I haven't been good at math since primary school. Maybe I can help you make friends with it. If it doesn't work, you can just kick me out, and that's it." Peter was shocked by himself. He was talking to a girl for the first time in his life, joking easily and freely, not overthinking every word. "Well, come on," Bonnie decided. "And when?" "Even now," Peter exclaimed enthusiastically. And Peter and Bonnie succeeded. Soon all classmates and teachers began to notice with surprise that Bonnie no longer panicked before every algebra lesson and began to answer and write tests confidently. By the end of the next quarter, she had improved her perpetually precarious C in algebra to a solid B. "Well, Bonnie, you see, it was worth starting to pay attention in lessons. You've achieved results," the math teacher solemnly pronounced, naturally attributing the success of this seemingly math-incapable girl to himself. And Bonnie, smiling, remembered how she had once, completely confused by graphs and functions, thrown the notebook and screamed, "I've had it with all this nonsense! You and it together! Get out of here! I don't need this stupid algebra!" And Peter, as if nothing had happened, as if this childish tantrum had never occurred, picked up the notebook from the floor, put it on the desk, carefully smoothing out the wrinkled cover, and said, "Bonnie, look, it's simple. You just need to remember." She felt deeply ashamed. She sat down quietly next to Peter and stared intently at the notebook. Such outbursts happened more than once. In moments of frustration, she called Peter a miserable nerd who couldn't understand that normal people couldn't grasp all this. But he just looked up at her and asked, "Bonnie, shall we continue now?" She was terribly ashamed, but Peter was ready to forgive her anything, for the simple human feeling that he finally had a friend. "Listen, Peter," Bonnie said, standing next to him during recess. "Why don't you ever come to the stadium? I've never seen you there." "Well, you know, I've had weak lungs since childhood. I can't even exercise." "Well, okay, but you're allowed to watch, right? You don't need strong lungs for that. Come tomorrow. We're playing volleyball with another class. Cheer for us." Of course he came and passionately supported Bonnie and her team. At first timidly and silently, then more and more actively and loudly, until finally he was jumping in the stands and shouting at the top of his voice, not thinking about whether he might start coughing. He grabbed the hands of those next to him and felt part of this big, cheerfully shouting, whistling, foot-stomping crowd. Bonnie, as it turned out, wasn't going to stop there and continued involving Peter in activities. "Peter, want to come with us on Sunday to cycle to the lake?" she suddenly suggested. "It's not far, don't worry, and my mum's brother Colin will be with us. Oh, listen, you probably don't have a bike. We'll lend you my old one. My parents gave me a new one, imagine, for finishing the school year without any C's." Bonnie giggled, playfully elbowing him. "Bonnie?" He was dying to go, but of course he couldn't. "Thanks, but it won't work." "Why won't it work? Are you offended that I'm offering you an old bike? That's nonsense. I'll give you the new bike and ride the old one myself. But if you scratch my new bike or damage it somehow, I'll kill you. I'm warning you now." "No, Bonnie, it's not that," Peter exclaimed, thinking he would happily ride the oldest, rustiest bike, even if he had to carry it the whole way. "I can't because I don't know how." "You can't ride a bike?" The girl was amazed. "Wow! Why? Didn't your father teach you?" "No, he didn't." Peter lowered his head. He was terribly ashamed that his father didn't live with them, as if it were his own fault. "Why? You know, but I don't remember ever seeing you with your father." "I don't think you will." Peter grinned and decided to tell the truth. "He hasn't lived with us for a long time." Bonnie looked at him sympathetically and understandingly, but there was no surprise, contempt, or pity in her eyes. "Ah, that's how it is. Well, I'm sorry," she said. "No, don't think badly, Bonnie. My dad is an excellent man. He visits us and helps with money, and he loves me." "Why are you making excuses?" Bonnie said, shrugging her shoulders. "It's common. Half our class has parents who don't live together, and it's no big deal. Well, listen, let me teach you. It's easy. I'll meet you at the stadium tonight." "Bonnie, what if it doesn't work out?" "What won't work out?" She looked at her friend. "What could fail? If I succeeded in algebra with your help, then I can teach you to ride a bike somehow. A bicycle is easier than all these functions, graphs, and equations. Just 2 pedals and a handlebar. You'll do fine, academician." Bonnie had a wonderful quality. She knew how to make any of his problems seem simple and manageable. Quite imperceptibly, in passing, she helped Peter overcome another complex that had tormented him since first grade, the complex of being from a single-parent family. It turned out that this didn't make him special, inferior, or defective. It was just how life was, and Bonnie helped him realize this. With the bike, everything worked out too, despite a scraped knee and bruised arms. But an impossibly happy Peter pedalled the old bike and felt almost like a cycling champion. Several years passed. By 10th grade, no one called Peter as the weak anymore, and if anyone remembered his childhood nickname, it was only to marvel at how time changes people. Peter had grown considerably, especially in his shoulders, and had almost caught up with his peers. Peter's father, with his extensive experience in long-distance transport, partnered with a friend to establish a small transport company that began generating decent income. With this money, Floyd and Miriam started taking Peter to the seaside, trips that proved miraculous for the boy. His coughing and choking ceased completely. He became able to participate in sports, and his skin developed a healthy tan. But the most remarkable change was in his demeanour. The young man now looked people in the eyes with the confidence, bravery, and intelligence of a mature person. It was truly the look of a man. The senior girls suddenly noticed, with amazement, that he had beautiful dark eyes, long eyelashes, and that Peter Moore was, in fact, quite handsome. Moreover, he remained an excellent student, spoke Spanish better than their teacher, and rumour had it that his father would give him a cool motorcycle after graduation. After graduation, Peter learned that Bonnie's parents were moving to another city. "What are you going to study?" he asked the girl. "I don't know. We'll see." Bonnie shrugged. "I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll go into physics." She laughed. "Imagine, Peter, how proud you'll be." They sat together one last time on a bench in the old park. "Take care, and make sure you become someone important. Have something named after me. A star, perhaps, or an island. Just nothing like formulas or chemical elements," she said, laughing. "But seriously, be happy, Peter." "You too." He took her hand and squeezed it in his palms. "I'll never forget you, Bonnie." Peter finished school, attended university, and graduated with honours in economics. His father, still in freight transport, helped him secure a position at a large firm through one of his clients. Peter worked diligently and proved his worth. Soon, everyone forgot he had been hired through connections. Within 3 years, he became head of the economic department, participating in crucial negotiations. The firm's management held him in high regard, and his future looked promising. That day, while going about his usual business, he received a call from his mother.
"Peter, son,"
Miriam's voice trembled, clearly on the verge of tears.
"I'm in trouble. Charlie is sick."
Indeed, it was a crisis. Miriam hadn't changed much in her ways since Peter graduated and began his independent life. She still lived in their old house, firmly declining Peter's offers to move to a newer, more comfortable place. She seemed content there alone, especially since Peter remained attentive, calling regularly, visiting often, and sometimes staying for days in his old room. Once assured of her beloved son's well-being, she had transformed both internally and externally. Most surprisingly to Peter's amazement, she finally had a connection with the neighbours after so many years. Though she had seemed oblivious to them for years, she had actually known everyone by name, remembered all the wives, husbands, children, and grandchildren who had lived there. The neighbourhood aunties, who had previously regarded Miriam with suspicion, welcomed her warmly into their circle, like a lost sheep returning to the fold. With the same intensity she had once used to avoid community life, Miriam now tended the courtyard gardens, organised parking petitions, and collected funds for security cameras. However, to endure her loneliness, she got a dog. This amusing pug became Miriam's second focus of care and love, after Peter. Charlie, as the dog was named, quickly realised his position and took full advantage. He was a spoiled, impudent creature, perpetually overweight because Miriam couldn't resist his pleading, moist eyes and pitiful expression that suggested imminent starvation.
"Mum, you've got to stop overfeeding him. This will end badly,"
Peter would repeatedly warn.
"He'll burst from gluttony."
Miriam would become concerned and Charlie would be put dieting. But his owner always stayed strong for a few days before relenting, and the cycle would begin anew. Despite this, the dog remained surprisingly energetic. Neither his shortness of breath nor his considerable size, which made him resemble a huge sausage more than a dog, seemed to bother him. Miriam adored Charlie. Peter felt grateful to the little freak, as he called his mother's companion, for bringing her such joy. Now his mother, fighting back tears, was saying Charlie was ill.
"Mum, could it be just an upset stomach? Perhaps he snuck some treats again. Maybe he'll feel better in a few hours."
"Oh no, Peter, what are you saying?" Mum sobbed. "He was okay, but after our walk he became so listless and lay down in his bed, and his nose is hot."
"Mum?" Peter glanced around helplessly, murmuring into the phone to comfort Miriam.
"Please don't cry. I'm sure everything will be fine. Here's what we'll do. I'll come over and take Charlie to the vet, okay?"
"Yes, please, son. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to him."
Within 30 minutes, Peter was at his mother's house. Thankful the office wasn't far. The dog lay on his bed, breathing heavily, his entire demeanour conveying one clear message.
"See what happens when you underfeed me and deny me treats? Now I'm weak, sick, and dying. You'll be sorry."
Mum stood beside the dog with her hands clasped in tiny despair.
"All right, Mum, stop it. It's going to be all right. Just stay at home and wait. Or better yet, go for a walk. I'll call you as soon as I've consulted the vet,"
Peter said, lifting a very heavy Charlie in his arms. The veterinary clinic had the same effect on Charlie as on any normal animal. The seemingly dying, immobile dog suddenly came to life and tried to escape Peter's arms. Fortunately, there was no queue, and Peter's struggle with the suddenly recovered pug didn't last long. "Come in, doctor is waiting for you," said the receptionist, nodding towards one of the doors. Peter stepped into the office,
struggling to hold the squirming Charlie. He cursed himself for not having thought to change his clothes in his hurry. Given the morning's negotiations, he was wearing his best suit, a classic three-piece in dark grey, of excellent quality and inconceivable cost. That's it, the suit's gone, he thought sadly, noticing the marks of sharp teeth on the sleeve. And when did he manage this, when just moments ago he was lying limp? God, how heavy he was! Preoccupied with his thoughts, Peter mumbled, without looking around, "Hello, Doctor," and placed Charlie on the examination table. "Peter? Peter Moore? My God, is it really you?" In front of him stood a short woman in a white medical suit. Her face was incredibly familiar, something from long ago, vague, almost forgotten, but terribly pleasant. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You don't recognize me," she laughed. "Bonnie!" He exhaled happily, with a touch of fright. "Bonnie!" They rushed towards each other and hugged tightly. "Oh, my goodness," Bonnie finally said, catching her breath. "How unexpected! How long has it been since we've seen each other? 6 years? No, 8. It's been 8 years. Where did you come from? And you're so handsome." She looked at him with obvious approval. "Why should it be sudden? I'm here quite logically." Peter laughed back. "Our old house isn't far from here, you must remember. But where did you come from? You left the city right after school." "I left, Peter, and I came back. I've been living here for 6 months now. My grandmother is sick, so the family council sent me back to my homeland." Bonnie looked at her old friend with shining eyes. "Oh, Peter, I'm so glad. I want to talk so much. But I have to work. Is this yours?" She leaned over the dog. All this time, Charlie, quiet and resigned to his fate, lay motionless on the table. Perhaps he had decided that if he kept quiet, they would forget about him. "Actually, he's not mine, he's Mum's. She called to say he was ill, fever and all that," Peter said. Bonnie looked at the dog. Peter looked at her thoughtfully. He could hardly remember what kind of girl she had been before. Pretty, slightly pretty, or ordinary. For him, Bonnie was his first and only real friend. Back then at school, she was the best girl in the world. Her looks hadn't mattered to him. Now before him stood a young woman, undeniably beautiful, with fine features, plump lips, barely visible freckles, and slightly rusty hair, carelessly pulled back into a ponytail. She was a little overweight, but that didn't detract from her appearance. Quite the opposite. "What are you looking at?" she asked suddenly, catching him off guard. He had thought her attention was completely absorbed by the dog. "Just trying to remember whether you had freckles as a child." Peter smiled. I did, laughed Bonnie. "I still have them all. But how did you turn out so handsome? You was an ugly duckling, and suddenly here's such a swan." "Well, you, as a veterinarian, would know better." Peter laughed back. "By the way, Bonnie, how did you end up becoming a vet?" "You don't know everything," she answered. "I've always had a talent for it. Remember how I used to chase rats, and how I wanted a puppy? But I never got one then." Peter felt surprisingly comfortable with her, more than he had in a long time. Despite his huge circle of acquaintances, no real friends had appeared during these years, neither at university nor at work. Whether it was his own fault, having grown used to being alone since childhood, or simply fate, was hard to say. Now, looking at Bonnie, he suddenly realized clearly that she had remained his only true friend in life. "Well, your fat fellow will be fine, if you follow my recommendations, especially regarding diet." Bonnie's words brought him back to reality. She examined the dog carefully, even looking into his eyes and stroking his head. Charlie fully settled into the role of a sufferer, wagged his tail languidly. "You've spoiled this dog, Peter. He's developed liver problems, and if this continues, other issues will follow. We'll need to take blood for tests and do an ultrasound. I can feel his enlarged liver with my fingers. It's like an old drunk's. I believe your pug has fatty liver dystrophy," Bonnie concluded. Dystrophy? Peter marvelled. For him, the word dystrophy was firmly associated with excessive thinness and malnutrition, certainly not with a pug weighing twice the norm. "Yes, Peter, dystrophy. Just a different kind from what you had as a child." Bonnie burst out laughing. "Bonnie, you know, I've only just realised how much I've missed your jokes all these years," Peter said, smiling broadly. In the evening, they sat in a cafe reminiscing about their childhood and catching up on their adult lives. "Do you remember how I frightened those boys when that one, what was his name? Oh, Tom, got on to me?" Bonnie laughed. "That's when you and I met. I saw some scrawny guy about to be beaten up, so I yelled." "Well, let's say you shouted after standing up for me," Peter corrected. "You just saved me, Bonnie." "Remember how you tore your trousers in front of the girls when you tried to sit on the twine?" Bonnie could hardly breathe from laughter. "Oh, and how we ate that whole roll at your mum's, and she rushed to call an ambulance. And how you were going to take my algebra exam for me." Memories of their friendship, completely forgotten over the years, pushed aside and overshadowed by other people and events, came alive before him as if they were yesterday. "I remember, Bonnie. Of course, I remember everything." He smiled wryly. "I even still have your old bicycle that you gave me. It's in the garage." "Oh, come on. Wow!" At last he'd managed to truly impress Bonnie. "Well, you're certainly a hoarder, Peter," she teased. Eventually, tired of laughing at old memories, they began discussing what had happened to them after school. Bonnie had attempted to study law after her family moved to another city, but quickly realised it wasn't for her. "I just couldn't imagine spending my whole life up to my neck in paperwork and grinding people's nerves," she explained. "And I got so sick of it. Horrible. I left in my second year. Oh, what happened at home? It's still terrible to remember. Then I figured out what was most unlike law. Veterinary medicine." "Yes, indeed, nothing in common," Peter said, amused. "So I enrolled. And you know what? I've never once regretted it." "You haven't changed a bit, Bonnie. Even in your youth you always did as you pleased. I don't remember you ever regretting your decisions." "Why should I be sorry?" Bonnie nodded. "You should have fun and not waste time on regrets. I'd rather be wrong than spend my life wondering whether I'm doing the right thing. And you, Peter, judging by your suit, calculate everything 100 steps ahead." "Yes, I guess so," he shrugged. "But of course I'm not as interesting as you. I'm often, as you say, up to my neck in paperwork. But you know what? I'm happy too. I do what I do better than anyone else, and everyone recognises that. That's important to me, you know?" "I understand." Bonnie studied him carefully. "I must say, you look terrific, Peter. I hardly recognised you at first. I thought you were James Bond with a fat pug in his arms. Do you always take your dogs to the vet in those suits? I dread to think what you wear to a restaurant." "Well, you'll find out." The man changed the subject. "I'm inviting you to dinner tomorrow night. You'll see my entire wardrobe." "So, today's reminiscing about our snotty youth isn't enough for you?" She looked at Peter carefully. "Not enough," he replied honestly. "I really want to see you again." Back home he couldn't settle down. He wandered around the flat and even drank half a glass of whiskey, something he never did. But the drink didn't calm him. If anything, it made him more agitated. He turned on the TV and stared at some film with a confusing plot, incomprehensible even to its creators. Usually such entertainment at day's end worked better than any sleeping pill, but not tonight. After pacing a while longer, he finally went to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. He resisted admitting it to himself, but in the morning, after tossing and turning all night, he finally understood. Bonnie, so cheerful, direct, and most importantly, incredibly feminine, stood before his mind's eye. No way. Peter couldn't believe it. It couldn't be. This was Bonnie, the neighbourhood girl, a devil in a skirt, as they'd called her. He'd seen her countless times, with scraped knees and elbows, in tattered clothes, with bruises, mud smeared on her face, stubbornly clenching her lips to keep from crying, no matter what happened. He still remembered how she would swear desperately, how she fought for justice, despite knowing she'd face her father's wrath later. Well, we've met after all these years. Of course I'm glad. She did so much for me back then. Was my friend, taught me so much. But why can't I sleep? Because I like her as a woman. I've never liked anyone this way. It's crazy. What am I supposed to do? Dawn was breaking outside. Peter abandoned his attempts to sleep, brewed the strongest coffee, and settling into his armchair with his favourite mug, smiled to himself. Tonight would be another evening with Bonnie, and he had sought himself out, realised that everything he'd imagined during the night was nonsense. Bonnie was a friend, of course, and he was truly glad that life had brought them together again. But falling in love? No. Of course not. That evening, he waited for Bonnie at the restaurant. She was running a bit late, and he sat at the table with his eyes half closed, listening to the quiet murmur of the restaurant. "Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry I'm late." Bonnie's rapid-fire voice rang out above him. "You see, I had an unscheduled patient at the clinic. I had to stay." He stood to greet her and froze. Bonnie was gorgeous. Her beauty was different, not poster-like or eye-popping, but calm, incredibly refined and stylish. She had casually styled her hair and applied minimal makeup to her eyes and lips, yet the effect was wonderful. Bonnie wore an elegant suit that shimmered slightly in the dim restaurant lighting, and her high-heeled shoes made her curvy figure absolutely stunning. The men in the room gave her approving glances. You're gorgeous," Peter said hoarsely, managing this unoriginal compliment with difficulty. "Thank you," she smiled, becoming even more attractive. "Well, not like you, of course, I must say. That suit you're wearing is just as good as the one you wore last night." That evening, they danced together, and Bonnie's closeness made him dizzy. He softly touched his lips to her hair, imperceptible to her, and felt as if a slight electric shock ran through his entire body. "Bonnie, I love you," Peter said suddenly. She looked up at him with shining eyes, sighed happily, and pressed herself against him. Within days, it seemed to both of them that they had always been together, never parted, and would remain so forever. Because when people are so perfect together, nothing else matters. 6 months after Bonnie entered his life, the firm where Peter had worked for several years celebrated its 25th anniversary. A grand party was organised at one of the city's finest entertainment complexes. Peter, as head of one of the financial service departments, was naturally invited. He disliked such events, and upon entering the crowded room, he thought wistfully that he would rather spend time with Bonnie at their favourite restaurant, and finally propose to her. He had been carrying the ring in his pocket for several days, waiting for the right moment. Unfortunately, Bonnie had been extremely busy at the clinic lately, and they hadn't managed to meet. "Well, I'll make an appearance, sit through the formal part, then slip away quietly," he decided. He mingled with the crowd, exchanging greetings, shaking hands, and feigning boundless enjoyment. Within half an hour, he developed a terrible headache. As his eyes scanned the hall, he noticed a girl. She sat apart from everyone at a table, looking like a schoolgirl who had wandered into an adult party. Her smoothly combed hair with long bangs covering her forehead, her bare face with only the faintest trace of lip gloss, and her modest dark dress with a small bow at the collar, all reinforced this first impression. Where did such a woman come from? Peter wondered. She was a striking contrast to the other women, who were dressed in frills and adorned with jewellery. Her beauty appeared especially delicate and graceful, compared to their artificially plumped lips, false lashes, hair extensions, and heavily made-up faces. She seemed lonely and sad, like a lost child. He felt compelled to cheer her up and make her smile. "Excuse me, miss, would you happen to have anything for a headache?" She looked at Peter, bewildered. "What?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with surprise. "Just suffering from a terrible headache. I'm searching for an angel to help me. You seem perfectly suited for the role of a celestial being. You're the loveliest one here. Why so sad?" A slight smile touched her lips. "That's better. You have a beautiful smile. Good luck to you." Peter bowed slightly and stepped away. "Do you even know who you just hit on?" David, who held a minor position in the transport department, but desperately tried to seem important among management, came up to him. "What are you talking about? I wasn't hitting on anyone, just making conversation. Besides, she's a lovely girl, unlike most people here." Peter replied irritably. "A lovely girl? That's Claire Angus herself. Does her name mean anything to you?" "What should it mean to me specifically?" David's affected manner of speaking was increasingly irritating Peter, but suddenly it clicked. "Angus. Now I understand. Yes, Claire Angus herself, our boss's beloved daughter, and sole heiress, by the way." Peter escaped from his companion's crude jokes and insinuations, and stepping aside, glanced toward her table. She was still there, sitting in the same spot, and seemed to be watching him intently, though perhaps that was just his imagination. Peter got home and immediately called Bonnie. "Listen, Bonnie, I've missed you terribly. Let's meet tomorrow, all right? No excuses, even if every dog in town gets rabies at once. Did you hear me? You must be at our usual place at 7 in the evening. Understand?" "Can't make it? Then come to my place." "No, we can't postpone this. It's critical. I have something serious to discuss with you. Okay? That's settled. I'll be waiting." The next morning, Peter was summoned by Mr. Angus himself, the company's owner. He managed strictly but fairly, showing zero tolerance for dishonesty and incompetence. His impeccable politeness often frightened people more than shouting would have. "Peter, I need to have a serious conversation with you." Mr. Angus appeared serious and composed as always, yet some unusual nervousness showed through. Is he nervous? Peter thought with amazement, observing his boss's uncharacteristic behaviour. Then, breaking his own protocol, Mr. Angus approached Peter, took him by the elbow, and led him to an enormous plush armchair at the back of the office. Then the boss coughed and, finally composing himself, spoke. I have a proposition for you. To be honest, I don't know how to put this because I've never been in such an awkward situation, but let me be frank. Yesterday, at the firm's anniversary reception, you met my daughter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, Peter said, confused. It seemed a little ridiculous.
To be honest, I had no idea she was your daughter, and it was hardly an acquaintance. It's just that Claire, was sitting alone, and it seemed to me that... So you came over and had a little chat. Yes, I know. The thing is, Peter, you've made quite an impression on my daughter. She'd like to meet you again.
Peter's face tensed.
No, you misunderstood me. Or perhaps I'm not explaining myself clearly.
Mr. Angus rubbed his forehead.
It's just that I've never had to discuss these things before. You're probably thinking that I've lost my mind, taking up matchmaking in my old age.
He stopped pacing around the office and sat down in a nearby chair.
Peter, I trust you deeply. I've been following your career in the company for a long time. In my opinion, you are one of our best specialists. I admire your honesty and integrity. But I'm addressing you now not as the founder and owner of the company, not as a CEO, but as a human being. A father, after all.
He coughed, overcame some doubts with visible effort, and continued,
You must have heard that all is not well in my family, that Claire lived abroad for a long time, studied abroad, then was treated in Europe for a rare disease. I'm sure you've heard something like that. You can't miss it. Well, Peter, my daughter was indeed being treated. She used something she shouldn't have. You know how it goes with wealthy students. When I realized it was too late.
Mr. Angus stood up, walked heavily to the bar, poured himself half a glass of amber liquid, and drank it in one gulp. Peter, shocked, sat still.
But that's in the past, thank God.
Mr. Angus's face immediately brightened.
Claire is completely healthy, both physically and mentally. I give you my word of honour. But you see, Peter, though Claire is all right, I constantly shake with fear. What if it happens again? What if she gets into trouble? What if someone drags her back into that life? I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat and run to check on her. You understand what I mean. One could go crazy this way. If she had a family, a husband, God willing, children, there'd be no time for such nonsense. Maybe I'm naive, but if there's even the slightest chance, I have to take it. Do you understand?
No. Peter, overwhelmed by what he had heard and seen, shook his head sincerely.
Oh, Peter, this is the first time since she came home, after everything, she has shown interest in a man. In you, Peter. I beg you.
It seemed as if any moment the omnipotent Mr. Angus would fall to his knees.
Just respond to her. At least show her some attention. She's a pretty girl, and clever, and generally...
The man fell silent, and suddenly, with a wave of his hand, transformed instantly back into the old Mr. Angus everyone had known for years, impeccably poised, haughty, and imperious.
Really? Why am I getting emotional? When you become a father, perhaps you'll understand me. He grinned. Anyway, you and me, Peter, we are business people, and I'd like to end this conversation professionally. It's elementary. You take care of my daughter, Claire, and if the matter ends in a wedding, I leave you my firm after my retirement. You see, it's quite straightforward. I don't expect an answer from you right now or even tomorrow. Think it over. Weigh everything up. And if you decide to accept my offer, I'll see you at my mansion next Saturday at 7 in the evening. Thank you. Peter, goodbye.
The conversation was clearly over. Peter stood up, nodded awkwardly, and walked away on stiff legs. What had he imagined? The old fool! It was the first thought that came into Peter's head, after he could think at all. Slipping me his daughter as bait,
and imagining I'd just swallow it up like that. No, does he really think everything can be bought? I should have told him to his face. I just felt sorry for him. Poor old man. One child, a daughter, and suddenly this. Oh, God, who would have thought it? I just wonder why Mr. Angus decided to confide in me in the first place. He's an incredible man. I can only imagine what he's been through, how hard it was for him to say all this. But to offer me his daughter, along with the firm, it's certainly too much even for him. I feel sorry for the girl, and I feel sorry for her father. She's the only one he's got. His anxiety is understandable. That he'd do anything is also understandable. She's beautiful, by the way. I know she's got a lot of money invested in her looks, and it shows, especially on her face. What was the last valuation of our assets? I don't remember, but I remember the annual turnover. That's a terrific sum of money. I'd never get another chance like this in my life. Nobody ever had a chance like this in their life. When Bonnie came in, Peter was completely lost and shattered. "Peter, I have grand news for you," she announced, warmly hugging him and kissing him on the nose. Had he been in his normal state, he would have noticed at once the burning eyes, the blush, and the mix of solemnity, joy, and fright on Bonnie's face. But he saw nothing, noticed nothing. Bonnie stood before him, and he saw another woman. He cursed himself, wanting to make this fog disappear, but nothing worked. In front of him stood Claire Angus, and beside her, as in some tacky advertisement about luxurious foreign life, sailed snow-white yachts, gleaming racing cars, and soaring skyscrapers with luxury apartments. "Peter, what's the matter with you today?" Bonnie gazed anxiously into his face. "I've been talking to you for half an hour, and you haven't spoken a single word." "What?" he asked. "That," Bonnie replied playfully. "No, Peter, you are certainly out of your senses. All right, I'll hold off with my news. But what did you have so special to tell me?" Peter tried to speak. "You?" Bonnie frowned. "You called me yesterday and said you needed to have a serious conversation with me. Well?" "Bonnie, I have a confession to make. Bonnie, I'm sorry, but we can't be together. I don't love you." She looked at him carefully, as if seeing his face for the first time, and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Peter endured life with Claire for 6 months. Then he apologized to her and left the firm for good. "But at least we tried," Mr. Angus said with a bitter grin at his farewell. 10 years passed. Peter Moore worked as a commercial director of a large construction company. 3 years ago he buried his mother, and shortly before that, his father died suddenly, leaving him all alone. After his family left him, he withdrew into himself and devoted all his time to work, earning a reputation as a tough, successful, and calculating businessman. Always impeccably polite and calm. One day, he surprised his lawyer with a serious reprimand. "Kenneth, listen, we have deadlines burning, machinery standing idle, contractors being disrupted, all because you can't formalize the ownership of a piece of land. What's the problem? Why should I stop the development of 3 hectares because of a 5 by 10 meter piece of land sticking out in the middle like a hair on a bald spot? What's going on?" "Mr. Moore, the problem is that the owner of this piece of land won't sell." "Am I supposed to teach you how to work? What do you mean? She doesn't want to sell." "But Mr. Moore, I did what you asked me to do. I offered money, big money. I even offered to let her set the price herself. But she joked that she had nowhere to put so much money anyway. Everything was occupied by cats. She's a bit eccentric. She said the amount doesn't matter at all. So what can I do? Apparently nothing. Peter waved his hand dismissively at his subordinate. All right, I guess I'll have to do everything myself. It's ridiculous. For years I've been buying up hectares of land without any problems, and now this tiny plot is like a bone in my throat. I wonder what kind of woman is so stubborn. She doesn't care about the money. It's baffling. Should I go see her myself? Half an hour later he was there. After noting the modest sign, Animal Shelter and Clinic, he pushed open the door. In the middle of the small room, a woman was leaning over a lamp-lit table. A red puppy whimpered under her hands. Quiet, quiet, little one, it's all right. We'll be showered with millions, and I'll put a golden necklace on you, she said, raising her eyes. And Peter, who felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Well, hello, Peter. Why have you come? Are you going to give me an offer, or just visiting? Are you going to bulldoze me and all my squeaking possessions? I knew you'd come. I saw your name in the documents your boys were waving around. Peter was silent. He could only sink onto the old stool by the door, his legs unable to hold him. Currently the door burst open, and a girl flew into the room. She looked a lot like Bonnie, and even more like someone hauntingly familiar, though Peter couldn't place who. Well, Bonnie grinned. If it happened like this, it was fate. Peter, meet Annie, your daughter. Peter looked at the girl and cried. He didn't know her age, but he realized she was as old as his betrayal. Peter Moore had a long road ahead of him to forgiveness, to letting go of pain and grievances, to transforming years of loneliness back into love. He had no certainty whether he would ever be forgiven and accepted, but he was no longer alone. He had Bonnie and Annie, and he was happy.
It was drizzling with light rain outside. Dusk was falling on the city, and there were fewer and fewer people around. There was almost no passerby on the road leading to the 7-story hospital building, and only one young woman was almost running, afraid that she would be late for work. She flew into the intensive care unit just 5 minutes before starting her shift, and immediately heard the doctor's voice. "Felicia, hurry up! Get changed quickly! You'll help!" shouted Dr. Harris at her. "We've got poisoning and cardiac arrest here. This girl swallowed some kind of junk, apparently because of unrequited love. Okay, not for the first time. We'll save her." A minute later, Felicia was already standing next to Dr. Harris, actively helping him to save the woman's life. Just a week before, Sandra, whose life was now being fought for by the doctor in the intensive care unit, could be called the happiest woman in the world. She thought to herself, because she had everything for happiness: a huge house where she was living with her parents, and an excellent education, and most importantly, her wedding with the best man in the world was about to take place. Sandra's parents were good people. They had a successful business, and so the girl had everything she could only dream of. But she was not spoiled, and grew up a modest and decent woman. Since childhood, she avoided bad companies, preferring instead a music school, where she was studying the violin. Sandra's parents have never had such problems with their daughter, as most of their friends, long tired of the behaviour of their ungrateful heirs. Those only knew how to live carelessly at their own pleasure, using their parents' money, demanding more and more, giving nothing in return, and not thinking about their future. But Sandra was completely different. She loved music and already in high school she performed in various music competitions and participated in charity concerts. She not only found a friend in music school, but also met her true love. She and Felicia had been friends for a few years, but then their communication stopped abruptly when Felicia quit music and moved to another city. But Sandra's love for Edgar, unlike friendship with Felicia, turned out to be really sincere, heartfelt and long. Edgar was a quiet, modest pianist from a low-income family. Sandra met him in the last grade of music school. He had just moved with his parents from a small town and came to study at their school. At first they were just friends, but Edgar was happy even about that because he could not imagine that such a rich and beautiful girl could fall in love with him. He loved her secretly, hiding his bright feelings for a long time, until one romantic incident pushed him to confess. Sandra and Edgar were returning from a joint performance at a charity concert when the bus suddenly broke down. The girl did not call her father to meet her because it was close to home and the road went through an amazingly beautiful promenade. The young people walked along the river where the moon and the stars were reflected, and Edgar felt that he could no longer keep silent. He took Sandra's hand and confessed his feelings to her. To his surprise and incredible joy, she reciprocated his feelings. This was the beginning of their relationship, which grew stronger every day. And although from the outside it might have seemed to many that the guy's goals were mercenary, time has shown that these suspicions were unfounded. During the 5 years of their relationship, Edgar never took a cent from Sandra. They both managed to graduate from college, get a job, and left the passion for music for the soul, sometimes taking part in charity concerts. Time passed, their wedding day was approaching, but before that, another important event was scheduled: a reunion of music school graduates. Felicia, the same nurse from the intensive care unit, also received an invitation to the evening, even though she had long ago given up playing the violin, considering it a waste of time. Her mother thought no one needed musicians, unlike nurses, and convinced her daughter to go to medical school. Felicia's mother was never enthusiastic about her daughter's friendship with Sandra as well. She thought she was a rich, feisty girl who would hurt her simple daughter occasionally, but Felicia was friends to Sandra for personal profit. Sandra always had a lot of pocket money, so Felicia always took advantage of it shamelessly, getting from her responsive friend everything that was usually out of her reach, from good food to clothes and cosmetics. But Sandra didn't notice. She thought of Felicia as her best friend and did everything in her power to help her. This friendship lasted until Edgar came along. Felicia immediately liked this reserved young man, probably because she herself had always been a cheerful and active girl, and opposites, as you know, always attract. Felicia was seriously infatuated with Edgar, following him everywhere and even threatening to hurt herself if he didn't agree to go out with her. But all was to no avail. Edgar was madly in love with Sandra, and after they began dating, the friendship between the girls gradually ended. Felicia was furious at how masterfully her former friend managed to steal her boyfriend. Outwardly, she tried not to show how hard it was for her, but every day at home the girl had real hysterics, with breaking of dishes, screaming, and tears. Felicia ended up going crazy with unrequited love, and one day decided to end her life by jumping into the river from a high bridge. Luckily, the girl was saved by a passing fisherman. Felicia's mother made sure no one knew what had happened, otherwise her daughter's admission to medical school would have been highly problematic. Thanks to a doctor she knew, she managed to get some powerful remedies and put the girl back on track.
Felicia left the city and went to college. Once she stopped seeing her former best friend and her boyfriend, she gradually forgot about them. After graduation, Felicia returned home and got a job as a nurse in the intensive care department of the local hospital, and she simply had no time left for reflections. But fate itself soon threw her a real test, which instantly awakened Felicia's hatred of other people's happiness. Sandra saw her school friend, whom she hadn't seen for several years, and she was delighted. "Hello, Felicia, how nice to see you," exclaimed Sandra, hugging her. "I was beginning to think we'd never see each other again. Where have you gone? By the way, Edgar and I have a wedding soon, and we're inviting you," said Sandra joyfully, not noticing how much the look on Felicia's face changed at that moment. She was looking at Sandra with a detached, unblinking look, and her anger was bubbling up inside her. Felicia was ready to immediately strangle her hated rival, but suddenly a smile lit up on her face, her soul became light and happy, and Felicia firmly hugged Sandra, wishing her happiness. They spent the whole evening together talking about everything and agreed to meet the next day in the park. When they met again, Felicia's cunning and cruel plan had already matured in her mind, and she immediately put it into action. Felicia was talking merrily with her friend, leading her away to a deserted part of the park. The severe illness, which Felicia had been fighting all this time with the help of strong medication, worsened at the very moment when she saw her former friend again, and left no chance for poor Sandra. When they were near the overgrown pond, Sandra felt a light prick in her neck and at the same moment lost consciousness. A distraught Felicia tried to push her into the water, but she didn't have the strength, and she left the poor woman to die on the bank and hurried to the hospital. It seemed to her that she had calculated everything correctly, and the poison, which should have stopped the girl's heart, would soon work. But if not, she would be taken to the very hospital where Felicia was working, and there she would finish the job so that no one would suspect anything. And so it happened. Sandra was found by a homeless man and called an ambulance, which arrived in time, and the woman ended up in intensive care. Sandra came to, and, barely opening her eyes, saw Felicia next to her. She was hovering over her, her face twisted in anger and her eyes burning with hatred. "Well, you survived after all. Yes, our doctor is a real professional," she hissed with hatred. "How I hate you. You always had everything, thanks to your parents. But you also decided to steal my Edgar. But now no one else will help you. Say goodbye to life." Hearing this, Sandra froze in horror. The woman only now realized that all these years her friend had hated her, and she understood why she had disappeared so suddenly from her life, which apparently had come to an end. Looking at Felicia, approaching with a pillow, Sandra squeezed her eyes shut in horror and prepared to die. But suddenly she heard a noise, and when she opened her eyes, she saw Felicia thrown by Edgar's strong arms into the corner of the ward, shouting curses and trying to pounce on the man. With a few swift movements, he twisted her arms and held her until the hospital staff came to help him. A month passed. Felicia was finally put where she should have been years ago, in a hospital for the mentally ill. Edgar and Sandra's wedding had to be postponed until the bride had finally recovered from the attack. But time passes, unnoticed for the lovers, and finally the long-awaited wedding day has come. The young people swore to each other in eternal love and fidelity, which none of them doubted. and most importantly, no one stood in the way of their absolute happiness anymore.
Elizabeth disliked her new neighbour from the very beginning. She didn't want to pry into someone else's life, but it was impossible not to notice how workers were unloading monstrously huge audio speakers from the truck, as well as a strange painting, as if someone had just splashed a bucket of paint on the canvas. So, he'll be listening to loud music. Artistic taste, by the way, can say a lot about a person's character as well. While transferring string beans, sour cream, bread and other groceries from the shopping bags to the fridge, Elizabeth shook her head disapprovingly, still thinking about the person with whom they were to share the staircase. "Mum, are you angry with me?" Jay, who was spinning around waiting for the promised chocolate, interrupted the woman's thoughts. "Angry? No, why? Why do you think so?" "Because you pressed your lips and frowned so much that you became all wrinkled." The first grader shared his observations. "Everything's fine, my dear. Don't worry. I'm going to prepare dinner now," the woman said with a smile. "Look at this. The new neighbour hasn't even moved in yet, but my mood is already ruined." When the neighbours, who have lived here all their lives, started to sell the apartment, Elizabeth worried about what the new tenants would be like, and it turned out her worries were not unfounded. In general, the apartment building was peaceful. Although not elite, it was located in a residential area with a rich urban history where every street was a monument of architecture. The hallways in the buildings were well maintained. Fluffy asters and elegant delphiniums bloomed annually in the flower beds in front of the entrance. And in the courtyard, formed by almost circularly arranged buildings, mothers safely let their children play without fear. Elizabeth raised her son alone, as her boyfriend had disappeared upon learning about her pregnancy. Unfortunately, Elizabeth's parents had already passed away from incurable diseases long before her son was born. She often thought that if they were alive, she might not have rushed into the arms of a man who only talked about love, but couldn't demonstrate it through actions. The first few months after the baby was born were challenging, but distant relatives supported her, and some acquaintances shared baby items. Elizabeth managed to earn some money while on maternity leave by illustrating children's colouring books. Later, she returned to work and was doing quite well, as the private gymnasium paid art teacher a good salary. Once, Elizabeth was on her way home. She stepped into the elevator and was reaching for the button when suddenly an unfamiliar voice sounded behind her. "Wait for us, please." Elizabeth, being a well-mannered person, pressed the hold button but immediately regretted it when she saw a tall man rushing towards the elevator. He had curly long hair and was wearing ripped jeans and a black leather jacket. However, it was not his appearance that frightened her, but the dog walking next to him. Even though the dog was on a leash, one look at its big, fanged mouth and tiny black bottomless eyes was enough to instill fear in even the bravest heart. Therefore, Elizabeth quickly released the hold button and stepped back into the depths of the elevator. "I'm sorry, I'm not taking the elevator with both of you," she said, leaving the stranger with the dog in front of the closing elevator doors. After finding herself back in the cozy confines of her apartment, Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, but then she heard some noise on the staircase and was driven by her curiosity to peek through the peephole. There, she saw the man and dog. That, and the unpleasant truth dawned on her. They moved into the apartment across the hall. The next morning, as Elizabeth hurried to work, she was surprised to see the same stranger from the day before standing outside the building. He was staring at his smartphone while his dog sniffed at the flowers in the flower bed. "You know, The common areas in front of the building are not meant for dogs." Elizabeth's voice sounded unkindly and unexpectedly haughty. "Do you think he'll eat the flowers?" the brunette retorted, lowering his sunglasses to the tip of his nose. "Oh, we've already met." Elizabeth's face flushed as she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and defiantly lifted her chin. "I just don't trust people like you." "Is this about me or Caesar?" asked the man with a smile. "Excuse me?" Elizabeth abruptly interrupted. "I don't have time for idle talk. Please keep an eye on your pet and put a muzzle on him. People actually live here." The brunette watched Elizabeth's slender figure move away with a pensive expression on her face. "Don't be offended," shook her head elderly neighbour Mrs. Rivers, who unwittingly heard this conversation. "She doesn't know that your dog is good. However, our Elizabeth's a kind woman. She teaches children to draw." The man had no chance of escaping Mrs. Rivers' story, and after 5 minutes he had a full verbal portrait of his neighbour. Over the next 2 weeks, they met several times. Of course, this is not unusual, and sometimes we meet our neighbours, but for some reason it seemed to Elizabeth that there was some kind of terrible fate in all this. Otherwise, how else to explain the fact that they both reached for the last can of canned red beans at the same time? "I'll give it to the lady. I'm a gentleman," said the neighbour with a smile. It was a Hollywood-style scene, and Elizabeth thought he could conquer any woman except her. She didn't like frivolous and arrogant types. One day, Elizabeth caught her neighbour doing a strange thing. He threw a gorgeous bouquet of white roses into the trash and kicked the bin. Walking past Elizabeth on his way home, he gave her a strange look, as if she was responsible for some kind of misfortune. "That girl dumped him." Elizabeth overheard a snippet of conversation between the elderly neighbours basking in the sun on the bench by the entrance the next day. For some reason, she thought that they were talking about her neighbour and no one else. What was she missing? "If only I were half a century younger," said Mrs. Rivers and laughed. However, in general, Elizabeth couldn't find any reasons to be unhappy with her neighbour. He didn't listen to music too loudly and didn't bother anyone. The days were getting shorter and the nights were getting colder. October crept up in a scarf made of burnt leaves. One day, Elizabeth and Jay were late coming home from distant relatives, and they had to pass through the alley, where ghostly shadows darted under the light of dim lanterns. A man unexpectedly emerged from the bushes, swaying and exuding danger. Another one joined him shortly. "Hey, beauty, don't you want to meet someone?" asked the first one. "What are you doing here?" spoke the second person, who looked like he had no permanent residence. Elizabeth instinctively squeezed Jay to her and stepped back. She should have called a cab, rather than walking around here, hoping that it wasn't too late, and here would be passers-by. And now they were practically alone. "Why are you shaking your bag? Is there anything valuable?" snarled the first person. Suddenly, a strong and commanding voice rang out. "Get away from her!" A neighbour with a dog emerged onto the park path. The dog looked impressive, surrounded by shadows, growling so terrifyingly that it was clear he couldn't wait to sink his teeth into whoever the owner pointed to. "Yes, that's right, this is a mean dog." The neighbour smiled and gracefully released part of the leash, allowing Caesar to move forward. "We like to run here, and if you don't want him to run after you, quickly move away from the woman and child and get out of here." "Let's go," said the first man, nervously swallowing. His companion didn't make him repeat, and soon both men disappeared into the depths of the park.
"Thank you,"
Elizabeth said with relief.
"You saved us,"
she added shyly. No big deal.
"Wow,
Does he bite?" Jay asked with enthusiasm that made it clear he would be terribly disappointed if it turned out such a beast didn't bite. "Maybe, if it's a bad person and I order him to," the neighbour replied. "But deep down, he's a goody-goody, and he likes someone scratching between his ears."
"Wow!"
Jay was an obedient boy, but he darted so quickly that his mother couldn't stop him. Elizabeth didn't even have time to be scared, as the child started stroking the dog, and he responded with content growling.
"Can you escort us?"
Elizabeth asked shyly, pointing towards their apartment. "Of course. We are just on our way home," the neighbour shrugged. They took the elevator together this time. Before going to their own apartments, Elizabeth suddenly touched the neighbour's sleeve and asked, "Excuse me, I still don't know your name." "Dale. Good night. And you take care of your mum and watch over her." The neighbour winked to Jay with a smile. After that, Elizabeth began to treat her neighbour better. Not only did she start greeting him, but when she ran out of flour at home and the dough for the pie was practically ready, she asked Dale to share a cup of flour with her. In gratitude, Elizabeth treated him to her signature cake. Then the first frost had hit, and Dale got sick. It was impossible not to notice, judging by how he coughed and breathed hoarsely. Summoning all her courage, Elizabeth volunteered to walk his dog. Contrary to her worst assumptions, Caesar turned out to be a terribly well-behaved pet. The time went by. On New Year's Eve, they exchanged gifts as a neighbour. Elizabeth gave Dale a scarf, embarrassed by the banality of the gift, but Dale warmly thanked her and assured her that he definitely wouldn't get sick again with such a gift. Jay gave Caesar a funny squeaky toy duck. Dale gave the boy a remote-controlled tractor, and his mother received a set of paints, which, coincidentally, she had been dreaming of for a long time. During their time together, Dale and Elizabeth learned a lot about each other. Dale traded art objects and ran a small art gallery with his cousin. He also had surprising knowledge of antique furniture restoration. "You two are a good match," Jay said, causing Elizabeth to choke on her tea in surprise. "You're both creative people." "Don't be ridiculous," Elizabeth responded. "And by the way, it's time for you to go to bed, my great matchmaker." But it so happened that Elizabeth began to see Dale in a different light and wondered how he felt about her. Everything was resolved on a balmy April day when the first buds began to bloom on the trees. Caesar was running around the park, sniffing for something. Dale was wrapped in a gifted scarf. "Don't you think spring is a time for change?" he asked suddenly. "Maybe," answered Elizabeth, concentrating on the reflection of the sky in the puddle. "Don't you think it's time to decide about us?" "Oh, I have to go home. I most likely forgot to turn off the oven," said the woman with a trembling voice. Dale seemed to ignore her words. "I don't want to ruin everything, but I just can't help inviting you for a cup of coffee right now. And this will be our first real date." "Dale, what are you talking about? What kind of date?" "The most ordinary, and I believe the most beautiful. I like you very much." "And what about our friendship? And by the way, we're grown-ups. If it doesn't work out," Elizabeth tried to argue. "Then you can say no right now, and I won't offer you anything else. I'll just be your friend and tolerable neighbour, like I was until this day." Elizabeth sighed. Men. Where did Dale get so much audacity? But she admitted to herself, and mentally, that he was only doing what she, who did not believe in fairy tales and signs of fate, would not dare for anything and never. "I guess I would have to agree," she said finally, and smiled shyly.
Carl left the house. Today was an important day for him. He had been working for a construction company for 2 years, and today was something like an exam interview. The management from the capital came. They would bid farewell to the old branch director and appoint a new one. There were 3 candidates for the position, everyone prepared carefully. Each was required to provide a development plan for the company. Carl worked on it for almost a month, and he was confident that his work was the best. He loved his job. Carl read a lot since childhood. It was then that he decided to become a builder, and that he would build conscientiously, not like those who built a new house in his district. Carl and his friends often played at the construction site. Once, some slab wobbled under Carl's feet. He shouted, tried to hold on to something, but could not. He fell down from a height of 4 meters. Gravel was piled up below, and large pieces of concrete were lying there. That's what he fell on. At first he didn't even lose consciousness, and it didn't hurt. Then fear came and he tried to stand up, and it was then that a sharp pain pierced his body. 6 months in the hospital, 3 operations. Carl could hardly understand what was happening around him. Every day he asked his mum to take him away. "Mummy, please, I can't take it any more. Take me home." And she was just crying and kissing him. Sometimes Dad appeared. He sat by his son's bed, held his hand, and was silent. After 6 months, the doctors first let him go home for 3 months, but only temporarily. Carl was old enough to understand that. He was 10 years old at the time. One early morning, when his parents thought he was asleep, Carl heard their conversation in the kitchen. He couldn't get up, but his mum always left the door open to hear if her son would call her. "Ray, what are we going to do? The operation is in a month and we have no money." "Lydia, well, what do you suggest? Sell a kidney?" "Come on, find a buyer. I'll sell it." "Ray, stop kidding. We need to come up with something." "Lydia, we just need to postpone the operation." "Are you crazy? Haven't you heard what the doctor said? Every month reduces the chances." A chair fell in the kitchen. Apparently, Dad jumped up. "Lydia, I'm doing everything I can. We've already spent away all the money. Everything, you understand? And those that were saved for his education, and those that were saved for repairs. Everything. You understand? But no, you demand something else from me." "I'm not demanding anything. Ray, I just have a feeling that you don't care. Do you even understand that our son may never walk again?" "I understand." "And you? What have you done to help him walk? Your accountant's salary at the nursing home is too small. It's almost non-existent." "But, Ray," the front door slammed loudly. This means Dad has already left. Carl heard his mother's footsteps approaching the room. He tightly closed his eyes, let her think he was sleeping, and tears wouldn't roll out of his closed eyes. Every day the boy waited to be taken to the hospital, but time passed, and he realized that his parents had not found the money, and he would be forever tied to his bed. He tried to distract himself by reading. He read so much that his eyes often got tired and his head hurt, but it helped to fall asleep quickly. And then something happened that divided his life into two halves, before the betrayal and after. His mother, his beloved mother, simply left him. She came in one morning in street clothes, put a small travel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of his bed. "How are you, son?" she asked quietly. Carl put the book aside. "As usual. Where are you going?" "Son, I need to leave. I came to say goodbye. I want you to know I love you more than anything in the world, more than my own life. Everything will be all right for you, I promise." The mother quickly kissed Carl and rushed out the door. He didn't even understand at first that she wasn't leaving for a day, but for a lifetime, and that she had simply abandoned him. Fortunately, his father was there to support and calm him down. In a month, he found the money for the operation, and Carl was finally able to take his first steps. He decided for himself that he no longer had a mother. He had a father who became everything to him. After almost a year of rehabilitation, Carl was able to return to school. His father even arranged for him to take express exams for the past year so that he could return to his own class. And then one day, Carl's father brought Laurie home. Although Carl didn't like her, he was always very polite to her. How could he be angry with his dad or give him orders? 20 years passed. Carl approached his car and stopped for a minute. He had bought the car just 2 weeks ago, and he still wasn't tired of admiring it. When he got into his car, he saw a young girl on the sidewalk staring at him intently. At first, Carl thought she was someone he knew, but then looking at her he dismissed the idea. She was too unfashionable and poorly dressed, so she certainly could not be his acquaintances. As the car drove away, the girl took out a photo from her pocket. It was a photo of Carl when he was very young. She sighed with satisfaction, picked up her bag and walked away. In the evening, Carl returned home in a great mood. Everything had gone as he thought. From today, he was the director of his branch. Few people achieved such a thing at only 30 years old. Carl packed his car and opened the trunk, taking out a cake and a package of champagne. He called his father in the morning and told him to set the table for celebrating. After saying this, he heard Laurie's displeased voice in the background. "He could have invited us to a restaurant." But Carl didn't let it spoil his mood. Of course he could have invited them to the restaurant, but he wanted to celebrate at home with his father, who had been there, who had once spared nothing to get him back on his feet. "Carl?" He turned around. In front of him stood the same girl from that morning. Up close, she turned out to be beautiful, with blue eyes and a blonde ponytail. Perhaps they knew each other after all. He searched for possible options in his head but found nothing suitable. Then he gave up. "Yes, do I know you?" "No, we don't know each other, thank God, but I need to talk to you." He raised an eyebrow. The girl was clearly hostile towards him. Damn, maybe he met her at Tom's country house. They had a great time that weekend, and honestly, Carl didn't remember half of it. "Well, let's talk. I can spare you 5 minutes." "I don't need that much time. Here, this is the address where your mother is. She's seriously ill. If you don't want to help her, at least come and visit her. Maybe you won't have a chance to meet her again." Carl withdrew the hand that he had reached out for the note. "I don't have a mother." The girl looked at him closely. "You're wrong. You have one, and no matter how hard you try to hide from it, she won't disappear." "Okay, let it be, but I don't want to see her." "Take the address." And just think that not everything in life is exactly as it seems to us. Goodbye." She handed him the note and quickly walked away. The evening was ruined. Carl didn't even know why he didn't tell his father anything. Probably just didn't want to spoil his mood. His dear father didn't deserve that. 2 days passed, and Carl kept thinking about the note that was lying in his pocket. On Saturday, after another restless night, he finally decided to go and just look into the eyes of the one who left him ill. He had to search for a long time. He circled around the suburban streets, which were all lined with old shacks, and couldn't find the right house. And then he saw her, that same girl. He stopped. "Hey, what's your name?" The girl turned around in surprise and smiled. "Did you come after all?" "I just want to look her in the eyes. Show me how to find this damn house." "Here it is, right behind you." Carl turned around and cursed. There was even a sign with a number on the house which he stubbornly didn't notice. The young man climbed up the old creaky stairs to the second floor. He reached out to ring the bell and lowered his hand. Mum. He couldn't remember anything bad except her leaving. Before, she loved him, cried by his bed, stroked his hand while he pretended to sleep. But now he had to pull himself together. This was the same woman who left him, afraid of difficulties. Dad said he tried to persuade her to stay, promised to find money, but Mum didn't listen to anyone. Apparently she already had someone who was more important to her than her son. The bell rang unexpectedly loud, and then Carl noticed that the door was slightly open. He walked in and immediately heard a voice. "Emily, is that you?" It was his mum's voice. Carl took a step forward. "No, it's not Emily." The woman lying on the couch groaned. "Son, Carl." "Yes, it's me." She tried to stand up but couldn't. Carl was standing in front of her and couldn't do anything. He didn't want to help her. He didn't want to touch her. The mother apparently understood this. "Son, sit down, there's a chair there," she said. He sat down and looked around. Poverty was staring at him from every corner. Everything seemed clean, but the feeling that he was in some kind of homeless shelter did not go away. Outside, some woman was screaming loudly. His mother smiled slightly. "That's the neighbours making a fuss. It's not uncommon here. How are you doing, son?" Carl smirked. "Don't you think it's a little late to be asking those questions?" "I'm sorry," the mother answered and got silent. Carl felt she was examining him. Then he noticed a childhood photo on the table next to the sofa. What a hypocrite his mother was. Now he understood everything completely. Apparently, her lover had left her a long time ago. Somehow, she found out that everything was wonderful in her son's life and decided to lure money out of him. Of course, that explains everything. "Why did you track me down? What do you want? Money? You don't bother putting on a show for me. Get up. Maybe you can at least make some tea." The mother tried to get up again. She managed to lower her legs to the floor, but didn't have the strength to go further. She said quietly, "I'm sorry, son. I can't seem to get up." The door slammed shut, and Emily entered the room. She immediately rushed to Carl's mother. "Lydia, have you lost your mind? You were absolutely forbidden to get up." The girl quickly put the woman back in her place, then turned to Carl. "What are you looking at? Why did you let her?" "Come on, maybe I should have put her to bed. I figured out your plan.
You could have just asked for money without making up all this drama." "What?" Emily squinted. "Money? You'll never be able to pay your mother for your life." "Natashenka, no need." "No need." Lydia was sobbing uncontrollably. But Emily was unstoppable, and crossing her arms over her chest, she continued, "And it's very convenient not to know. You sleep better if you don't know, right? Carl, are you doing well? Okay, get out of here. Your mum has already looked at you, and that's enough." Suddenly there was a sigh from the sofa. Emily turned sharply, ran to her, and shouted at Carl. Carl poked at his phone with his fingers and didn't understand anything. So she really called him to see how he was before she died. Probably to ask for forgiveness. The ambulance took Lydia away and he followed. He made sure that his mother received all the necessary help, then asked the doctor, "When can I visit her?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Be sure to come. Things are not going well," answered the doctor. Carl left the hospital and immediately saw Emily crying on a bench near the entrance. He walked over and sat down next to her. "Why are you crying? The doctor said you can visit tomorrow." She raised her wet eyes and said, "Really? I got so scared for her." "Yeah. Can I take you home?" "Thank you, if it's not too much trouble." Carl pulled out of the hospital parking lot. He decided to come back tomorrow to give his mother a chance to ask for forgiveness and calm down her soul. But if she hopes for any kind of relationship, then she's wrong. They drove through an already familiar neighbourhood, and Carl was very surprised. "I live in the same apartment building as Lydia, just at a different entrance." "So, you're neighbours?" asked Carl, who just didn't know what else to say. The girls looked at him strangely, then nodded and asked, "So, are you going to see your mum tomorrow?" "Yes, I promised the doctor I would stop by." "Tell me, what time will you go?" Carl felt joy. She was definitely interested in him. Of course, she dressed modestly, but her figure and face were beautiful, so he definitely wouldn't mind having an affair with her. "At 3:00. "Okay, I'll come later. I don't think you'll be there long." "Why later?" Carl was disappointed. Emily had already gotten out of the car, but before closing the door, she replied, "So as not to cross paths with you." The door slammed shut, and Carl stared back at her for a while longer. Finally he shook his head and slapped his palms on the steering wheel. "This is unacceptable. Who does she think she is?" He drove the car towards home, anger bubbling up in his chest. How could his mother do this? She left him a sick boy. She simply didn't want to burden herself with care, and now, thanks to this Emily, she was trying to make him feel guilty about something. No way. They found the wrong person. To hell with them all. He wouldn't even think of visiting her at the hospital tomorrow. Let them deal with this mess themselves. Carl was so angry that he didn't notice the red traffic light, the screeching of brakes, the impact, and the darkness. He couldn't wake up, or rather, he wasn't asleep, but he still couldn't wake up. Nothing hurt. There was some emptiness around him, but he understood that he could hear everything. It's just that he couldn't wake up. He heard footsteps, light ones, barely audible. "Hello? Oh, it's the little wicked one. Emily, right?" Carl made an incredible effort and opened his eyes. Emily, and it was her, immediately disappeared, and a second later the doctor's face appeared. "Hello, I'm Dr. Sullivan. What's your name?" "Carl. How old are you?" 30. "Great. said Dr. Sullivan, and shone a flashlight in Carl's eyes, causing him to close them immediately. Excellent, then rest. The doctor disappeared and Emily reappeared. I won't be long. Your family just left not long ago. Your stepmother is such an unpleasant woman. How have you been living with her? She convinced everyone here to give her a paper stating that you won't become helpless after the accident. Your father tried to calm her down, but she screamed, I'm filing for divorce. I won't live under the same roof with your disabled son. I'm not surprised. I'm starting to get used to it. Get used to what? Well, as soon as something happens to me, women abandon me. Are you talking about your mother now? Emily's eyes sparkled warily, but she calmed down and continued, You shouldn't say that. But who am I talking to? I thought you hit your head so hard that your brain was put in the right place, but no, it remained where it was. You know, at first, I had a better opinion of you. Rather, I hoped that you would at least try to find out the truth to understand who is really guilty. But you, Emily couldn't find the right words. Anyway, get well soon. She walked to the door and Carl watched her before closing his eyes. He never thought that there were people who could upset him in 2 minutes, despite lying there filled with injections. What's wrong with her? What is she talking about all the time? What truth is she talking about that he doesn't know, and that should immediately change his opinion about the whole world? His head ached, and he wanted to know the terrible secret that Emily constantly talked about. On the other hand, she could tell him everything herself and not create confusion and run away. Bad luck for her husband, if there was one at all. The doctor came to him in the evening. Well, what can I say? It's not as bad as it seems. You can sit down. Get up slowly. The blow hit your forehead, but your forehead turned out to be strong. Carl immediately sat down. His head spun, but it was tolerable. Doctor, tell me, a woman got to the hospital yesterday, most likely McClincy, but may have a different surname. How can I find her? The doctor slapped himself on the forehead. And I was thinking, where do I remember you from? You came with her, didn't you? Yes, that was me, said Carl. She is in the 7th ward. The department is across from this one. I need to go there. Well, no, that's out of the question. Such long trips are not necessary yet. Let's observe you for a day or two, then you can go. The doctor left. Carl waited another half hour. The hospital was already quiet. He slowly approached the door and peeked out. No one was in the corridor. Only cheerful voices could be heard from the nurses' station. Apparently, the nurses were chatting. Carl crept along the wall to the door of the ward, opened it slightly and stepped into the corridor. He rested for a bit and headed towards the opposite door. There was no one in the corridor there either. He chose the perfect time. The patients had been fed and settled, and now the staff could eat and rest. The 7th ward was right in front of him. He didn't have time to think. He pulled the door towards him. His eyes didn't immediately adjust to the semi-darkness, and when they did, he saw his mother. Carl! What happened to you, son? It's nothing, just hit my head. Do you know why I came? She shook her head negatively. You have to tell me why you abandoned me. I thought I didn't care about it, but now I understand that I would like to know. I want to understand who you met on your way that made you decide to abandon a sick child.
She was silent for a minute, then answered, "I didn't abandon you, Carl. I just had no other choice." "Lies. I remember you coming to say goodbye to me. No one forced you out of the house. You made that decision yourself, right?" "Right, of course myself. No one forced me," answered the mother and sighed. Honestly, Carl was disappointed. Only now did he realize that he entertained the thought that after his mother's story he could forgive her. Well, if not entirely, then at least a little. He wanted to help her. In treatment, maybe even in something else, but how could he help a person who had treated him like that? "Well, now just tell me the reason and I'll go. I understand a sick child is a burden, but you didn't leave for nothing, did you?" "Okay, I'll tell you everything, but it's not a short story." "I'm not rushing," answered Carl, and sitting in the chair got ready to listen. Lydia sighed and closed her eyes. "Your surgery was postponed again and again. I realized that with each time the chances became smaller. There was no money. At all. I tried to get a loan. I put the apartment up for collateral, but everywhere the amount offered was not even half of the expenses. 3 months after you were discharged, I started to notice that our father smelled of another woman's perfume. There were traces of lipstick on his shirt. And then I realized that Ray wouldn't help us with anything. He distanced himself. He had his own, separate personal life from us. I had to act as soon as possible." Carl looked at his mother in complete bewilderment. She was saying something strange. Father was always around. He found that damned money. True, Carl never asked where he had found them. Besides, he remembers it well. After the surgery, they started living better. Dad opened his own small business. Yes, he was never home, but Carl, though not yet an adult, understood perfectly well that his father needed to work a lot. Lydia continued, "Once, exhausted from running around to banks, I sat on a bench in the park and cried. Then someone called out to me. I looked up and saw my friend Laurie. Because of recent events, I hadn't seen her in almost a year. She sat down and we talked. She was so outraged with Ray's behaviour and his cheating. And as a farewell, she said, I'd also think about it, and if I come up with something, I'll call you right away. I don't know if you can call it luck, but literally 2 days later, her boss's daughter hit and ran someone. Laurie, seeing that her boss wasn't upset, asked if anything had happened. They had a good relationship, and her boss told her everything. Together, they came up with a solution. She called me that night and said that her boss was willing to pay twice as much as needed for the operation. I had an hour to decide. Your father wasn't home. Laurie said that the remaining money could be spent on the best lawyer who could minimize my sentence. Yes, they offered me to take the blame for the boss's daughter. I agreed. I understood that I wouldn't see you for a very long time, but at least you could run like before. Your dad only showed up in the morning. I told him everything. He agreed with my decision. He said he would do everything to get the shortest possible sentence. He couldn't come to the trial because he was with you in the hospital. Laurie didn't come either. But I knew for sure that you were already being helped, and I was hoping for an amnesty. However, I was given 9 years. I don't know why so much. Maybe they found something else there, or maybe the person who died wasn't just an ordinary man. As you understand, there was no reconsideration of the case, no lawyers, nothing. I couldn't tell the truth. it would only make things worse. The money was paid and the operation was done for you. That boss kept her promise. I was released on parole after 7 years and went straight home. I really wanted to see you, but the door of my house was opened by Laurie. It can't be. Laurie? Unfortunately, yes. It was she who insisted on leaving everything as it was. It was to her that your dad used to run at night. I don't blame him. Not everyone can handle what we had at home. A puzzle was forming in Carl's head. Money, a better life. Laurie. I left. Laurie explained to me that you hated me and your father loved her. You have a family, and I'm not needed by anyone anymore. I rented this apartment. It's not expensive. I got a job at the factory. I often came to your house, then to the college. I watched you from afar very often. I cried and admired. You grew up to be a real handsome man, a smart one. I'm very proud of you. I would never have stood in your way. But Emily, I once made the mistake of telling her everything, and Emily was burning with indignation all this time. And when I got sick, she decided to find you. I was against it. But she's stubborn. Yes, that's for sure. Carl was quiet for a while, digesting the information and getting used to it. Why didn't you come to see me earlier? Why didn't you tell me? Well, if I hadn't started listening, you would have written a letter. Lydia was silent. Mum, are you listening? He asked irritatedly. Silence again. Carl rushed to the bed and Nina's hand hung limply. Her cheeks were wet with tears, eyes closed, and her lips were white. Mum! He touched her, and the second hand also slid like a rag. Carl grabbed his mother by the shoulders. Mum! Mum, not now, please! He shook her and shouted, and tears streamed from his eyes. Someone pulled him away from the bed, and then he felt a prick in his shoulder and darkness. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to be there next to his mum. He woke up in his room with his father sitting next to him. Carl looked at him and couldn't understand how he could go on living. Why couldn't he live without hate? He had hated his mother so much, and now it turned out he needed to hate his father? Dad? Ray stirred and opened his eyes. Son. Dad, is it all true? Everything my mother has told me? Ray looked his son in the eye. Yes, Carl, everything is true. I'm sorry it turned out that way. I understand you probably won't want to see me. And you know, that's all right. I bought a ticket to my sister's. Her husband died and it's hard for her to be alone with 2 kids. I'll go live there. I left everything to you. You'll find the documents at home. Laurie left for someone luckier. Goodbye, son. And forgive me if you can. His father headed towards the door, seemingly waiting for Carl to call out to him. Carl wanted to, but he held back. Son, why are you running around? You have a wedding today, and you're behaving like a little boy. Lydia smiled at her son, seeing as he put on a tie, then took it off and put on a bow tie. She had returned from Germany 2 months ago, where she had undergone a complicated heart surgery. Carl sold his father's business to pay for it as soon as he found out the surgery was possible. Lydia advised against it, but Carl was adamant. And now Lydia was hard to recognize. She seemed to have dropped 20 years. Mum, how can you not worry? It's like you don't know Emily. She'll change her mind 18 times and run away. Lydia laughed. She won't change her mind. She loves you. Mum, really? Do you really think so? Carl sat next to his mother on the couch and she hugged him. Well, of course. I even think she fell in love with you at first sight. But don't give me away, or she'll get me too. Mother and son laughed. Well, now that they were reunited, they were making up for all the time they had missed.